Another day, another recap. Today, we'll be diving into an action crime drama Korean series titled Big Mouth. This recap will feature all episodes, so without further ado, make sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy the recap. On a dark, rainy night, several bars of gold are buried in cement. Various news reports regarding corruption and loss unveil a mysterious big mouse to be the primary culprit of multiple crimes across the city of Gutcheon. Be it theft from the NR Forum, the distribution of illegal drugs, or illegal campaign donations, Big Mouse seems to be behind everything. As it turns out, Gutcheon is one of those places that seems to be perfectly lovely from afar when it is actually steeped in crime and corruption. Since most people are expectedly busy trying to make a livelihood, nobody is interested in bigger goals like social justice. One such citizen is Park Chang-ho, a third-rate lawyer whose only objective in life is to live happily with his family. That night he links up with his wife Mi-ho, as well as his father-in-law, Gi-gwang, at an upscale restaurant. However, during the expensive meal, he suddenly receives a call from Prosecutor Cho, and he apologizes to his wife as he must leave dinner early. On his way to the prosecutor's office, he accepts a coffee on his way out. But once he gets inside his car and drives, he quickly realizes that he was given something else. Not able to see properly in front of him, he ends up in a bad accident. The story goes back to 1 week ago where Chang-ho is legally representing victims of a cryptocurrency scam. Already scared of his wife since he lost her money as well, Chang-ho confesses to his father-in-law, who is also the manager of his office, that he had borrowed from a moneylender to bribe the judge. However, at the trial, Gi-gwang and Chang-ho shockingly noticed that the defense lawyers had changed, and so had the judge. By the end of the trial, Chang-ho was mobbed by fellow victims as they chose to trust him instead of hiring a big law firm for their case. His attempts at placating the crowd were fruitless, since his reputation as Big Mouth had followed his legal career by his big promises never being fulfilled. Contemplating whether to put an end to his career later, he fearfully answers a call from Mi-ho. As expected, she is not impressed with the outcome of the trial when Chang-ho jokingly suggests that he should look into being a divorce lawyer instead. Considering the idea, Mi-ho escalates the matter by saying that she'd like a divorce from him before getting called in for work. Meeting his friend Soon-tae that evening over dinner, Chang-ho wonders why his life is in its current state. Later that night, Mi-ho catches her father leaving the house with a bag when she asks him who he would prefer to stay with in case she and Chang-ho get a divorce. Gi-gwang replies that he should be with Chang-ho since he cannot live on his own and hurriedly leaves the house. Gi-gwang then meets his son-in-law downstairs and hands him a bag of clothes as Chang-ho intends to sleep in the office till Mi-ho's anger recedes. He then surprisingly receives a call from Mayor Do-ha asking him to meet regarding a criminal case. Immediately, he gets into his car and drives to the mayor. However, the journey is longer than expected, and after some off-roading, he finally meets up with Mayor Do-ha. The mayor gets right into it and tells Chang-ho that he wants him to take on a murder case in relation to the Gutcheon University Hospital where Dr. Seo was found dead in a trunk. 3 of the mayor's friends are the prime suspects, which includes one of the hospital's surgeons, Dr. Han, its in-house attorney, Lee, and Young, the son of the foundation's chairman. The mayor adds as Chang-ho has a success rate of less than 10%. He is the perfect lawyer for them, as they have already bought everyone out and just need a face to listen to their instructions. However, as Chang-ho is about to decline the offer, Do-ha tells him the 3 men and the doctor are part of the NR Forum or Nine Rivers Forum and have all helped him become the mayor by interfering in government matters. Hence, he wants some leverage against them to stop their interference. He tells Chang-ho that the truth can be unveiled if the interior dashcam recording is found. Finally realizing the mayor's motive to have him be a double agent for his personal gain, Chang-ho is further enticed by the cash offered to him in advance. In an attempt to convince Chang-ho to accept, he says that an honest lawyer taking on corruption would make for impressive work, which finally gets Chang-ho to agree. The first stop he takes is to Soon-tae's to ask for help in doing some background checks on the 3 suspects. Despite being inmates, Chang-ho is not surprised to see that his clients were being provided with every luxury they could ask for while being in prison. Introducing himself to the 3 suspects, he then gracefully accepts the plan put together for the trial without question and seems like he won't cause any trouble for them to be freed. Just then, a call from the mayor lets them know that the prosecution received a tip from a lawyer regarding the dashcam recording. Chang-ho thinks back to how Soon-tae called it in last night under a different name. Chang-ho is then promptly dismissed soon after, but he ensures that he disposes his drink in the bin before leaving. Tuning into the bug he planted, Chang-ho then learns that Dr. Han gave the recording to his wife. The 3 inmates then discuss the importance of the recording as it is their only insurance policy. Hearing this, Chang-ho realizes that there must be another accomplice involved. He calls the mayor to inform him about the recording and also tells him about his suspicions of a 4th accomplice. Do-ha tells him that he will head over to Dr. Han's wife Hyejin, who is at a studio shooting her cooking show. After the shoot, a hooded person approaches her dressing room just as Mayor Do-ha reaches the studio as well. They suddenly hear her voice calling out for help and rush over to find her door locked. Chang-ho gets there as well and breaks the door open. While the others tend to an unconscious Hyejin, Chang-ho approaches the open window and spots the hooded figure getting away. After the police leave a while later, Mayor Do-ha and Chang-ho speak to Hyejin about the dashcam recording. While she refuses the knowledge of such a recording at first, she reconsiders when Chang-ho tells her about the punishment for withholding evidence. She eventually names Gong Ji-hoon, the owner of a daily newspaper, as the fourth accomplice. As it turns out, Ji-hoon is quite popular among the rich and all three suspects in the case are his minions. Later, Hyejin hands over the dashcam recording to Chang-ho with a piece of advice asking him to be careful about the people involved in the case. Watching the recording reveals that while Dr. Han drives the car, the other two repeatedly strike Dr. Seo and threaten him to withdraw his paper. Such was their rage that they incessantly hit him until he mouths off, and this does not end well. The two beating him up eventually ends the doctor's life. Continuing to watch, Chang-ho sees Young speaking to someone on the phone and notices that Ji-hoon's name is not mentioned even once throughout the whole thing. All the three men there stress quite some bit, and in the meantime Mi-ho and Gig-wang have dinner at home when they are interrupted by the doorbell. Expecting it to be Chang-ho, Mi-ho opens the door only to find executives from the court there to seize his personal property. Gig-wang tries to sneakily warn Chang-ho about the seizure when Mi-ho grabs the phone and begins to nag about having borrowed from a moneylender. When Chang-ho abruptly disconnects the call, Mi-ho blames her father for being equally irresponsible. Chang-ho continues working and is looking into Ji-hoon when Mayor No-ha calls him. He doesn't answer the call though, and decides to work on the case purely for the sake of the money offered to him, since that is the only solution to the problems in his life. Quite as expected, Mi-ho is taken aback by seeing the money when Chang-ho gets home. Despite not believing that her husband managed to get a big case out of nowhere, she is still pleased about the money. With their third anniversary the next day, the two go to bed happy. Determined that he will be rich if things go well, and he will still gain enough fame if he loses, Chang-ho places a call to Ji-hoon the next morning. Arriving at Ji-hoon's vacation home, he looks around in awe at the luxurious lifestyle of the rich. Speaking to Ji-hoon about the evidence he found in the case, Chang-ho informs him of his suspicions that the person Young spoke to must be the one with the biggest motive to end Dr. Seo. In an attempted blackmail, Chang-ho then offers Ji-hoon the dashcam recording in return for 3 billion won. However, Ji-hoon does not take the bait and completely dismisses him instead. Chang-ho then informs Mayor Do-ha that he will make sure the dashcam recording reaches the prosecutor of their case, and later that evening sends a message to Prosecutor Cho before meeting Mi-ho and Gig-wang for their celebratory dinner. But as seen earlier, Chang-ho leaves early and grabs a coffee to go meet up with the prosecutor. On the road, Chang-ho catches a radio broadcast discussing the mysterious con artist Big Mouse and hopes for him to be caught so he can defend him and make some money. Just then, the laced coffee kicks in and the car as well as his surroundings turns into something on a spaceship. Eventually, this causes his senses and head to completely mess up and he loses control of his car and crashes. After multiple flips, he gains consciousness and now he is a changed man. While being rushed to the hospital, Chang-ho's life flashes by. In his memory, when Mi-ho suggests getting a divorce, he lurches awake in the present. Remembering that his phone must have been left behind in his car, he uses Mi-ho's phone to call himself. It seems to be too late, however, as a man grabs the phone as well as the dashcam recording before overseeing Chang-ho's car being scrapped. Discharged from the hospital later, Chang-ho is preparing to leave when the police arrive and place him under arrest for being intoxicated. In custody at the prosecutor's office, Chang-ho thinks back to the coffee he was offered, and then to his meeting with Ji-hoon. Assuming that Ji-hoon must be behind lacing his coffee in the eventual accident, Chang-ho requests to meet the mayor. He then offers to find Dr. Seo's buried paper in return for Mayor Do-ha's help in releasing him. However, Mayor Do-ha outright refuses his plea. Meanwhile, an investigation unit with a search warrant ransacks Chang-ho's office. To Gig-wang's shock, they knock a wall down and find several gold bars and a gun in addition to a large quantity of narcotics. Furthermore, the roof gives way to a lot of cash as well. Chang-ho is then transferred to the Gucheon Penitentiary, a prison with a reputation of being the worst in the country. While human rights do not exist here anyway, there is deep entrenchment of corruption as well, with special treatment made available for certain inmates. With Warden Park following his progress, Chang-ho is taken away from the general cells and is eventually presented before Dr. Han, Lee and Young. This results in Chang-ho finally realizing who pulled the strings for his accident. In a show of their power at the prison, they get Chang-ho beaten up by a few other inmates. Elsewhere, Mayor Do-ha and Ji-hoon are at a party with their wives when the news breaks regarding the capture of Big Mouse, the conman. Quite surprisingly, it is Chang-ho's picture being circulated as the evasive criminal, along with reports of huge cash, plenty of drugs, several gaming ledgers and burner phones being seized. Back at the prison, a thoroughly injured Chang-ho is tied to the ceiling with just a tiny seat supporting him. As he apologizes, they do not listen and almost kill him. Following the news reports, Ji-hoon immediately contacts Warden Park to ensure that Chang-ho survives the prison so that they can get back the money he swindled. This causes the warden to rush downstairs with medical personnel who are successful in reviving Chang-ho. Outside, Miho and Suntae are both denied permission to visit Changho. A while later, Gigwang informs Suntae of Changho being reported as Big Mouse. Suntae suggests going to his office, but Miho requests him to take her home despite the presence of the media there. Inside the prison, the news of Big Mouse's capture spreads even as Changho is unceremoniously shoved into a cell with several others. Left to himself in a corner, he then catches Miho speaking to the media on TV while she insists that her husband is certainly not Big Mouse. Speaking directly to him, she assures him that she will fight to prove his innocence and even warns him not to refuse to meet her again. A thoroughly helpless Changho gets even more emotional when reminded of his family. Taken in for questioning with the prosecutor the next day, Changho clarifies that he wouldn't have been several months behind on his rent if he knew that his office had hidden wealth worth billions. Put through a polygraph test, he is surprised when asked if he is Big Mouse. His surprise causes the graph to jump even as he vehemently denies all the claims. Observing the questioning, Mayor Do-ha seems to be convinced that Changho is indeed the skilled criminal. Back at the prison, Dr. Han, Lee and Young are split over whether Changho could really be Big Mouse even as the man in question returns to his cell. One of his cellmates, Jerry, introduces himself as a fan of Big Mouse and offers his devotion to Changho despite him repeatedly denying being the criminal. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon strictly instructs his accomplices to let him look into the matter, and accordingly meets the case's prosecutor later that evening. He learns that the prosecution had followed an anonymous tip earlier but is now working diligently to expose Big Mouse's identity. The prosecutor then heads straight to Mayor Do-ha and hands over Big Mouse's ledger of drugs to him. Ensuring the prosecutor does not have extra copies of the list, the mayor then reminds him to stay loyal to only him. Meanwhile, despite Suntae and Gigwang's warning to stay away from their investigation, Miho joins the discussion and insists that they need to find Dr. Seo's buried paper to know the reason for his death. The next morning, speculations are rife across the prison regarding whether or not Changho is actually Big Mouse. While someone insists that they have met the man, someone else believes that Big Mouse is a woman, and others believe he has a connection with the mafia as well. During lunch, Changho gets into a fight with another inmate regarding his identity before the guards break it up. Intrigued, the warden has Changho brought to the special ward and offers him a scrumptious lunch. While Changho has his fill, the warden inquires about his ancestors. Considering they both had the same family name, it is then concluded that Changho is possibly related to Warden Park, but since he cannot address him as his uncle, he is relieved he can at least think of the warden as an elder brother. His relief is short-lived though, as he is soon asked if he is Big Mouse. Choosing to be honest, Changho confesses the truth, which earns him a slap in addition to being sent to solitary confinement for 5 days. Frustrated and on his own, Changho thinks back to when they had to deal with a leaking ceiling at home and Miho had bravely volunteered to confront their neighbors upstairs. They eventually got into a fight with them over their refusal to fix a broken pipe, only for Miho to use a fire extinguisher to end the fight. They had then celebrated getting money for the leakage. This memory is haunting Miho as well as she misses her husband. The next morning, she applies to the Gutchin University Hospital where she meets Mayor Do-ha's wife as her interviewer. Once Miho is accepted there, Suntae informs Changho of her intentions to find Dr. Seo's paper. He also tells him that he has been unable to ask Mayor Do-ha for help. Facing certain indictment in such a situation, Changho requests Suntae to file for a divorce on his behalf to save Miho from all the trouble. Back in his cell in solitary, Changho thinks back to when Miho refused to break up with him and instead suggested that they get married when he was studying to get into law school. Later, he had proposed to her the day he set up his office and she had been happy to accept. Haunted by these memories, Changho decides to end it all and incriminate everyone, thereby proving his innocence. Despite it being a difficult decision to make, he writes a letter thanking Miho for her presence in his life. However, the room leader of his general cell convinces him otherwise. He then realizes that he just needs to instigate one of the many criminals around him, and that they'll kill him. At lunch that day, he picks a fight with Chunsik, the same inmate who fought him the previous day, and challenges him to end his life. However, Changho's unexpectedly strong punch knocks Chunsik out. He then spots a psychopathic inmate on death row to be his next candidate. However, repeatedly slapping and disrespecting him also doesn't work in Changho's favor. Instead, all of this results in Changho gaining respect around the prison, much to Jerry's delight. Over lunch that day, Changho learns that an inmate was killed while trying to escape the previous night. This reminds him that Warden Park is the worst criminal in the prison, and so he makes a run for it that night. Funnily enough, he willingly lets himself be seen, which causes all armed guards to head to him. He intentionally puts up a resistance, wanting the guards to shoot him, but the screen cuts to black. When it comes back, Changho tries getting the guards to shoot at him when Warden Park orders his men not to do anything. Ji-hoon reminds the warden to keep Changho alive and assures him of a gift once he gets his money back from Big Mouse. The next morning is Miho's first day at the Gutchin University Hospital. Assigned to the cancer center, she observes that the rest of the nurses aren't thrilled about the new recruit. To overwhelm her further, Miho is left on her own to deal with the patient's medicines while the nurses take their lunch break. However, experienced as she is, Miho bravely takes on the challenge and ensures everyone has their medicines. When she reaches the last patient, she sees him having a cardiac arrest. Immediately calling for a code blue through the hospital, she then provides CPR. She successfully saves the patient but is surprisingly reprimanded by the hospital's director, Dr. Hyun Juhee. Later, the head nurse informs Miho that the guardians of the patients on their floor had all agreed not to resuscitate them and warns her to just do as she is asked to. During her break, she overhears an executive of the hospital forcing a guardian to sign a DNR request form in return for compensation, which raises her curiosity. Discussing with Suntae and her father later that evening, they wonder if it has anything to do with Dr. Seo's paper. Suntae then gives her Chang-ho's petition for divorce and tries to convince her about it as well. However, she tears it up and demands to be taken to meet him right away. But since Chang-ho is in solitary confinement, Suntae tells her that visits are not possible at the moment. The next day, Warden Park looks through his ledger and realizes that he needs to catch a big fish for an increased cash flow. For this, he calls for an assembly of Chang-ho's ward and gets a bunch of inmates called out separately. Forming the apparent grade A, Chang-ho learns from Jerry that these inmates either pay a monthly bribe to the warden or agree to do whatever the warden asks of them. Since Chang-ho's room leader, No Park, regularly reads the warden's fortune, he is always favored to be in grade A. Jerry further adds that the VIPs are beyond the grading system. One inmate does not agree with these rules and speaks up, which immediately results with him taking a beating from the guards. Chang-ho quickly intervenes and stops the attack. The lawyer in him then compels himself to confront Warden Park, who then recites his interpretation of the law, and reiterates that he makes the rules. With grade A inmates free to do whatever they please, their biggest privilege is to assist the VIP inmates and gain their favor exactly the way Chunsik is always found around them. On the other hand, grade C inmates, including Chang-ho and Jerry, are treated like slaves and put to work at the prison's filthy sewage facility. An inmate named Taesik, who requires money for his wife's surgery, is told by Chunsik and the VIPs to attack Chang-ho in the yard the next day. The warden calls in his men as he sees the attack. But surprised by the attack, Chang-ho manages to deflect it. However, Taesik's desperation for money is proven with his persistent intensity. The guards eventually knock him out, but the attempted attack makes Chang-ho realize that the VIPs are not the ones that made him Big Mouse. In a crazy twist, Warden Park demands a monthly bribe from Chang-ho in return for hiding the truth about him not being Big Mouse. When he mentions that even Miho and Gig Wong could eventually face danger because of this lie, Chang-ho warns him not to harm them. Overwhelmed with the fact that his family could be at risk, Chang-ho chooses to become Big Mouse for real and refuses to bribe the warden. Meanwhile, as a witness in the case, Miho is questioned by the prosecutor. Unknown to the fact that Mayor Do-ha was observing her, Miho denies Chang-ho being a criminal and instead offers her cooperation to find the real Big Mouse. On her own later, she thinks back to the good times she has had with her husband and misses him quite some bit. Mayor Do-ha then notices her from across the street before heading home. Speaking to his wife later, he asks her about Dr. Seo's paper, but she simply dismisses him, saying that there isn't any such paper. At the prison the next afternoon, Chang-ho leads the grade C inmates in a protest against the horrible food they were provided. In an attempt to prove himself as Big Mouse, he keeps the guards at bay while flinging feces at them. This garners the attention of all the inmates, and while Chang-ho still puts the guards on show, this act eventually summons the warden to the scene, and fearlessly playing the role of Big Mouse, Chang-ho confidently demands food for his grade. With the entire prison watching, the warden is compelled to give in, which earns Chang-ho admiration and respect from not just the inmates of his grade but all the others as well. Later, he is told of Suntae's arrival, who lets an emotional Miho and Chang-ho have some time on their own. She assures him that she has no intentions of granting him a divorce and leaving him on his own. Relieved at not being alone, Chang-ho's newfound determination compels him to find who was responsible for all the mess in his life. Meeting Jerry in the yard the next day, he asks him to spread the word across the prison that he is willing to fulfill the inmates' wishes. He then tells Jerry to bring the interested inmates to the chapel to meet him. Quite surprisingly, his first meeting is with No Park, who asks him to find his only daughter. He says that since the police gave up looking for her after a year of her disappearance, he had himself tried looking wherever possible, and had instead been involved in a car accident that had got him imprisoned. Chang-ho's next wish fulfillment candidate turns out to be Kwang Yin, the inmate on death row, who asks him to save his mother, who needs a bone marrow transplant. Her details reveal that she is admitted to the Guchun University Hospital in the cancer ward, where Miho is trying her best to find Dr. Seo's unpublished paper by speaking to his colleagues. She is taken aback when the resident doctors badmouth him while the nurses and patients always praise him. Her asking around, though, eventually leads her to be called in to meet Dr. Hyun Juhee. Miho is then asked to voluntarily leave the hospital because of the accusation of her husband being Big Mouse. Miho makes her case by requesting to stay at least till Chang-ho's sentencing, as it was her husband, the mayor, who put Chang-ho on the case, which eventually led to the entire Big Mouse fiasco. Dr. Juhee tells her that there isn't any such paper that she keeps trying to find and promptly dismisses her. Leaving the director's office, Miho meets a patient's guardian who requests her to save her husband, but the head nurse calls for her before she can get any more information. Meanwhile, back at the prison, the VIPs bribe Warden Park 300 million won to stop Chang-ho from forming a dedicated and loyal group of his own. Accepting the deal, he agrees to look away while they execute their plan. Along with two others, Tae-sik is transferred to Chang-ho's cell and asks for his forgiveness. Reading his fortune, No Park warns him to follow the rules to live longer. The next day, Tae-sik tells Chang-ho that he had attacked him hoping to get some money from the VIPs, but they did not follow through on the deal. However, he later receives a knife from Chun-sik, which the warden watches as well. He instructs a guard to have medical personnel on standby and to ensure that Chang-ho is stabbed only once. Warden Park then proceeds to watch the cameras in the yard outside, where quite a few prisoners are sent to do some work. Surprisingly, the guards lock the gate behind the inmates and run off. Realizing an impending attack, Chang-ho and his men get ready. Armed with whatever they can grab, a fight takes place between the two sides. Everybody swings and cracks at whoever is next to them. No Park defends quite well, and so does Chang-ho. Jerry is then almost stabbed, but he dodges and the fight carries on with Chang-ho going up against Tae-sik. Problematically, he is cornered, but Jerry comes to his rescue just as the VIPs discuss the arrival of an unexpected newcomer on their side, Kwang Yin. As he holds a knife and approaches Chang-ho, No Park sacrifices himself and jumps in the way. With everyone still attacking each other, Chang-ho has had enough and kicks Kwang Yin. As he laughs, Chang-ho sits atop his friend and looks up. And finally, after the warden has had his fun, he calls in the guards to handle the situation. No Park is then taken to the medical room where the warden visits him later. When he asks why No Park decided to take Chang-ho's side instead of living comfortably in the prison, he simply whispers something to the warden. Meanwhile, Kwang Yin, Tae-sik, Jerry and Chang-ho are all in solitary confinement when, in a surprising move, Chang-ho and Jerry are released soon after. On the other hand, the VIPs complain to the warden about saving Chang-ho and warn him not to let Ji-hoon know about the attack. Intending to milk the opportunity, Warden Park offers a renegotiation of their deal and is successful in asking for more money from the VIPs. At the hospital, Miho is accused of administering the wrong quantity of medicine to a patient. Fortunately, she had taken a picture of the doctor's instructions beforehand, which saves her. But she doubts the head nurse for foul play. Further fueled by rampant rumors about Chang-ho during a seminar later, Miho announces that she has Dr. Seo's unpublished paper. When she informs her father about it, she mentions that she expects at least somebody to get hooked onto the bait. When she senses someone following her home that evening, she makes a run for it and instead finds her father. Exactly like she expected, however, her bait is successful in getting the attention of Mayor Do-ha as he calls her soon after, and they decide to meet the next day. At the prison, Chang-ho visits No Park in the medical room and apologizes for the trouble he caused. Meanwhile, the inmates in solitary confinement wonder why the warden had not freed them yet if he was supposedly on their side, and blame Tae-sik. What they did not know was that Tae-sik is found dead in his cell. Chang-ho learns of this while leaving the medical room when the warden doubts whether he is responsible for Tae-sik's end. Elsewhere, Miho meets Mayor Do-ha and asks for his help. She informs him of the hospital forcing DNR request forms on their cancer patients and wonders whether Dr. Hyun Joo-hee knows about it. Mayor Do-ha denies his wife having any such knowledge before leaving. Meanwhile, back at the prison, Warden Park welcomes Ji-hoon, who is there to meet Big Mouse. Testing Chang-ho, he gives him till the weekend to provide 5 names to whom Big Mouse supplied drugs to prove his identity. Sneakily attacking a guard later, Chang-ho calls Mayor Do-ha to inform him about Ji-hoon's visit and asks for his help. Intrigued about the connection Ji-hoon has with the prosecutor, Mayor Do-ha gets his secretary to look into it. Meanwhile, the fear of Big Mouse grows in solitary confinement, where inmates insist that they are going to be next in line to lose their lives. This gets the warden to release them into the general ward, where along with 2 others, Kwang Yin faces Chang-ho during lunch that day for the first time since his betrayal. Suddenly, the other 2 men are poisoned, which lets Chang-ho conclude that the real Big Mouse might actually be somewhere around him. Going through the recordings for the police investigation, Warden Park finds evidence that the inmates ate the poison inside their food and promptly heads over to Chang-ho's cell for an inspection. However, a thorough search reveals absolutely nothing, much to the warden's dismay. He warns Chang-ho to come up with the names Ji-hoon asked for and threatens his life if he isn't able to deliver on time. Elsewhere, Ji-hoon and his friend, Sung-tae, arrive to meet an elderly person and are asked to wait till the earlier guest leaves. While he waits, Ji-hoon anxiously wonders who the guest must be and is surprised to know that it is Dr. Hyun Joo-hee. Even more surprisingly, Ji-hoon is denied permission to meet the elderly person until he gets back the money he lost because of Big Mouse. He is instead directed to support Mayor Do-ha during his dinner that evening with the majority party leader and the Secretary General. Ji-hoon and Sung-tae obediently head over to the restaurant to meet the leader, Mr. Do-ha and General Kim. Over the meal, it is suggested that Mayor Do-ha gets a seat at the next general election. While the mayor is grateful for the opportunity, it is quite clear that Ji-hoon is uncomfortable with his progress. He clarifies later that he did not appreciate being consulted before the mayor decided to take his next big step in politics, and reminds him that it is because of his support that he got to be mayor in the first place. However, Mayor Do-ha replies that he has helped him make a lot of money while he held his position, and adds that he wanted to stop being the mayor just because he wanted to be done with all the shady business with Ji-hoon. When he warns him to not cause any more trouble, Sung-tae gets there to defuse the tension. However, all seems not to be lost for Ji-hoon, as he gleefully tells Sung-tae later that if a betrayal of their elder by Mayor Do-ha came to light, it would be enough to destroy him. Meanwhile, Miho realizes that she is being followed on her way home and promptly texts her father. Soon-tae accompanies Gig-won to head to her location, intending to nab the fellow while she hides in a public toilet on the way to wait for them. Gig-won manages to grab the guy, and quite surprisingly, Miho recognizes him as Mayor Do-ha's secretary. The mayor is looking at photographs of Ji-hoon enjoying a game of golf with the prosecutor when Miho calls him from his secretary's phone and demands an explanation. He carries the ledger that he received from the prosecutor with him before heading over to meet Miho. Everyone is gathered at Soon-tae's office when the mayor gets there and informs Miho that he asked his secretary to tail her only to ensure her safety. When she doesn't believe him, he then hands over a small envelope to her for Chang-ho. The next day, she visits Chang-ho and it is revealed that the mayor had provided the list of names that he needs. He uses Miho's phone to call Mayor Do-ha to express his gratitude. He also tells Miho to trust only the mayor to be on their side. Elsewhere, Ji-hoon and the prosecutor discuss how the list handed over to the mayor itself is fake. As it turns out, Ji-hoon randomly wrote that list himself to see how the mayor uses it so as to trap him. This implies that if Chang-ho uses the names on that list, Ji-hoon will be able to get rid of both him and Mayor Do-ha in one strike. To further cement the prosecutor's loyalty, Ji-hoon assures him of the post of chief prosecutor. He then also calls the VIPs at the prison to let them know about Chang-ho getting the list from Mayor Do-ha. Meanwhile, a bunch of inmates are discussing a rumor about Big Mouse using sorcery to end the lives of his enemies when Chun-sik puts an end to it. He is then informed about a bet across the prison regarding who among Big Mouse and the 3 VIPs would win. Not only are all the inmates discreetly involved in this bet, but the prison's guards are in on it as well. The bet uses transportation cards with a limit of 1,000,001, which grabs the attention of even Warden Park himself. When the VIPs hear of this bet, they find that Jerry is the coordinator and get him beaten up by the guards. He is then taken to Chang-ho, who bravely challenges the VIPs by announcing that not only will Big Mouse win, but everyone who bets on him will also win big. To make things more difficult, he even gets into another bet with the VIPs that he will be able to give Ji-hoon the list of names he wants, and Warden Park is appointed as their dealer. The next morning, Ji-hoon meets Mayor Do-ha before heading to the prison and informs the mayor that the list he has is fake. When the warden does not answer his calls, the mayor has no other option but to rush to the prison. Chang-ho is soon notified of the arrival of a visitor, and the entire prison chants his name in support as he makes his way out. Fortunately, Mayor Do-ha arrives on time and asks to speak privately, but Warden Park does not allow it and instead gets Chang-ho taken straight to meet Ji-hoon as planned. There he instructs both Ji-hoon and Chang-ho to write down the names of Big Mouse's 5 biggest clients. Once he reads out Ji-hoon's list of names, Warden Park then glances at Chang-ho's list and it is seen that both the lists match. While everyone is shocked, Chang-ho maintains a calm poker face. This news is quickly brought back to the rest of the inmates who, upon receiving the good news, cheer and celebrate, as they all completely believe Chang-ho is really Big Mouse. With Chang-ho's identity successfully proven, Ji-hoon demands his money back and says that the fund manager Peter Hong had disappeared after blaming it all on Big Mouse. Chang-ho is then summoned by the prosecutor for an interrogation, which gets Ji-hoon to reveal that Peter was actually caught the earlier night. During his interrogation, Peter says that he was on the verge of losing his life 5 years ago until he was contacted by a new investor. The investments he made for this newcomer had then miraculously turned a huge profit in a mere fortnight. Peter had begun revering this unknown investor and says that he was eventually made the fund manager of a huge private placement fund only for his hard work to be destroyed by Big Mouse. He agrees to have met him once but also says that he had neither seen his face nor heard his voice. The prosecutor then shows him Chang-ho's photo and insists that this is the guy he saw that day. On their way to observe the interrogation, curiosity causes Ji-hoon to joke about the mayor being Big Mouse. Meanwhile, Peter contemplates the prosecutor's offer and is assured of his safety if he simply followed the instructions. Upon Chang-ho's arrival, the prosecutor asks Peter to confirm his identity. Just then, Peter's alarm for his insulin shot goes off. After he administers it, however, he soon begins choking and quickly enough dies. Having lost a key witness in the case, Ji-hoon doubts if Miho is lying about finding Dr. Seo's paper, which causes Mayor Do-ha to be intrigued as well. While leaving after her shift that day, Miho is reminded about the hospital's volunteer program at the prison that weekend, and the head nurse excuses her from participating. Nonetheless, she insists on joining them. Downstairs, the guardian who had met Miho earlier is thinking back to how Dr. Seo had asked if the jewelry she designed could hide a chip. Miho goes over to her only to have her walk away. Just then, Ji-hoon invites her over for a meeting. While he welcomes her graciously, she doesn't know that Mayor Do-ha is listening as well. Ji-hoon offers to buy Dr. Seo's paper from her, but Miho declines the offer. When he tells her about the miracle Chang-ho pulled off by somehow providing the real names, she thinks back to her last visit during which she had been told of his plan to impersonate the criminal for the sake of his trial. Soon after Ji-hoon fails to convince her that Chang-ho is Big Mouse, Miho leaves and immediately calls Mayor Do-ha to thank him for his help. Meanwhile, Gig-won and Soon-tae are looking into Dr. Seo's life as a loner when a bunch of his profile pictures prove that he went fishing with at least one other person who took those pictures. When they ask around about him at one of those locations, they are shocked to know that Dr. Seo had an affair and used to visit with his mistress. Back at the prison, Jerry and No Park are distributing the winnings of their successful bet to the inmates when Chun-sik gets there. As it turns out, he had bet 50 cards on Big Mouse, which has made him the biggest winner amongst all the participants. In the warden's office, Chang-ho's bet with the VIPs is settled. Hoping to earn Warden Park's favor, he offers him more than the agreed-upon commission to become a VIP and then adds some more for a prison-wide party. The inmates name him as their hero, and even Chun-sik appreciates him before leaving to join the VIPs. As they discuss their case going to trial soon, Chang-ho decides to join the conversation and suggests that they confess during the trial if they wish to keep living. He implies something is wrong with the wine they are having before leaving. Taking up the mantle of Big Mouse, he then decides to prove that his threats are not just words. With the help of his group, Chang-ho launches an elaborate attack on the VIPs. One is scared with contaminated wine while another is electrocuted while in the washroom and has to be taken to the hospital. Chang-ho's dedication gets Mayor Do-ha wondering whether he truly is the mastermind who had everything planned beforehand. Refusing to answer him, Chang-ho simply asks him to decide whether or not he will continue helping him. At the hospital, meanwhile, the head nurse is discreetly taking blood samples when Miho sees her and silently follows her to the hospital's innovation center. She clearly sees her going into a supply room, but when she gets there herself, the head nurse is nowhere to be found. Just then, a security personnel, Mr. Ham, accompanies Dr. Hyun Juhee to the supply room. Miho insists that she was following the head nurse, but Mr. Ham confirms that he didn't see anybody else. This lets Dr. Hyun Juhee conclude that Miho is indeed yet again where she should not be, and warns her to stick to her job. After Miho leaves, Dr. Hyun Juhee instructs Mr. Ham never to go further inside the supply room. Meanwhile, at the prison, the VIPs talk about being scared of Chang-ho and urge Ji-hoon to help them avoid their trial in some way or the other. On his way out, he meets Chang-ho and warns him to stay away from the VIPs for Miho's sake. To his surprise, though, his wife calls him, complaining about having received white chrysanthemums generally meant for funerals that were delivered in his name. With this move, Chang-ho establishes his capability to fight for Miho's sake not just within the prison, but outside as well. While this is a difficult pill to swallow for Ji-hoon, Warden Park is thoroughly pleased to see him somewhat helpless. Wondering why Chun-sik is loyal to the VIPs, Chang-ho then seeks him out for an honest conversation. When he downright refuses to betray the VIPs, Chang-ho makes a bet about who will leave the prison first. One of the VIPs, Dr. Han, is beaten up by a bunch of inmates loyal to Chun-sik and presented before Chang-ho later in the same place where he had been hung up. Intending to make him betray the others, Chang-ho asks him to confess at the trial, considering he was only driving the car during the incident. When he refuses to answer, Chang-ho gets him thinking of his life. Dr. Han finally agrees to confess at the trial, but Chang-ho knocks him out nonetheless. With a bucket of water poured on him soon after, Dr. Han gains consciousness and Chang-ho reminds him of the promise he made. Meanwhile, Miho is discussing their next steps with her father and Soon-tae when Mayor Do-ha requests a meeting. He tells her about him not knowing anything about his father dumping the toxic waste of his dye factory, and likens her to himself. He says that she has to believe that her husband is really Big Mouse to save herself before it is too late. When she refuses, the mayor tells her that even when he gave Chang-ho a list of fake names, he still knew the correct ones. He also tells her that the only person who had seen Big Mouse was mysteriously poisoned during his interrogation with Chang-ho. When she continues to trust her husband, Mayor Do-ha informs her that Chang-ho himself confessed to being Big Mouse and told him to keep it from her. The mayor's persistence confuses Miho, and she calls her father, who tells her that Chang-ho paid off the loan of more than 100 million won in cash, and wonders where he got the money from. This further adds to her confusion about the husband she has known all these years and the man he seems to have become. She continues to be deep in her thoughts even after getting home, and her only relief is the knowledge that she will meet Chang-ho the next day while volunteering with the hospital's staff. The day dawns bright and early at the prison, with Warden Park warning the inmates to be on their best behavior when the medical team arrives. Not realizing that Miho will be there as well, Chang-ho refuses to get a checkup done. Meanwhile, Dr. Hyun Juhee is finalizing the schedule for the day before the group gets on its way. She wonders why Ji-hoon's wife Ashley has joined them and is told that she is merely obeying their elder by being there. She asks Ashley to stick around with Hyejin, Dr. Han's wife, who is accompanying them for the inmates' special meal. The warden heartily welcomes everyone when they get to the prison, and one of the guards recognizes Miho from when she visited Chang-ho previously. He promptly relays the news to Chang-ho, who eagerly gets ready to meet her. His power as Big Mouse is on display later, when even the guard accompanying the VIPs steps away at his nod. The VIPs are then carried away by his group of inmates to be locked in a storage room for the day. Just then, the guard informs Chang-ho that Dr. Han's wife is also a volunteer. Letting Dr. Han know about it, Jerry tells him that Chang-ho will ensure he gets to meet her during the day before locking them up again. This special treatment gets the other two to doubt whether Dr. Han has joined Chang-ho's camp, but he convinces them that this is all Chang-ho's ploy to drive a wedge between them. Meanwhile, Miho witnesses Big Mouse's influence when the inmates bow to her in respect. A guard then offers to escort her to Chang-ho, and she follows him to the VIP den, warning him not to lie but still fearing his answer. She asks him if he really is Big Mouse, knowing that their conversation can be heard by the warden. Chang-ho remains silent before eventually pulling her out into the yard where Warden Park cannot hear them. Only then does he start talking. He says that after he got the list from Mayor Do-ha, he was knocked out, and when he gained consciousness later, the list had disappeared. He had then realized that there was a tarot card in his pocket with a list of 5 different names. After arranging for a fresh set of tarot cards through the guards, Chang-ho had asked No Park to interpret the meaning of the one he had received, despite him insisting that it was not his expertise. While it depicted a tower on fire, No Park interpreted the disaster to be a new beginning, since a better tower could be built. When Miho asks about Peter's mysterious end, Chang-ho tells her that Big Mouse communicates through his special set of tarot cards and that whatever they stand for ends up happening. When none of this seems to have anything to do with Dr. Seo, Chang-ho informs her about having received a judgment card which he thinks means that it is his mission to reveal the truth about his paper and ensure punishment for his culprits. During his wish fulfillment exercise, he had sent Big Mouse a message of his acceptance to fight and had received the magician card in return, implying the acknowledgement of his skills. Realizing the pressure Chang-ho is under, Miho apologizes for doubting him and insists on sharing the burden by finding Dr. Seo's paper. With their differences reconciled, Warden Park wonders what they might have spoken about. Later, after administering a flu shot to Chun-sek, Miho spots 2 different boxes of blood samples with the head nurse and wonders what it could mean. Meanwhile, Hyejin is escorted by a guard to meet her husband in the medical room. When she blocks his advances, Dr. Han hits her and questions if she had an affair going on, considering she had not answered his call the previous week. With him strangling her, she manages to say that she had forgotten her phone in the car. Realizing his blunder when she complains of pain, he profusely apologizes to her while slapping himself and assures her that he will soon be granted medical bail. During lunch later, Chang-ho is given the revered Big Mouse treatment. He speaks to each of the volunteers, including the head nurse, followed by praising Ashley on an award she won recently. He then praises Miho's work ethic when he gets to Dr. Hyun Juhi. While leaving the prison, Miho notices the bruises on Hyejin. However, her questions are quickly shot down by Hyejin, who insists that she is alright. Suddenly, Ashley announces to the group that she has arranged an after-party at her gallery, and then confesses to Dr. Hyun Juhi that she simply needs a group picture to show the elder. Stating her scheduled night shift that evening as a reason, Miho requests to be excused from attending. Without denying or confirming the Big Mouse rumors, she then tells her father and Suntae that Chang-ho is Chang-ho. Elsewhere, Ji-hoon finally gets to ask the elder if medical bail can be arranged for his friends. When the elder replies that he doesn't have good relations with the case's judge, Mayor Do-ha pitches in and offers to speak to the judge. With the mayor gaining another point from the elder in his favor, Ji-hoon can only sigh in anger. Arriving at the hospital for her shift, Miho gets a call from Kyung-suk, the patient's guardian from earlier. She tells Miho that Dr. Seo's paper is in a necklace of a cross. However, before she can say who owns that necklace, she is pushed off from the roof of the hospital to her end. Remembering that Dr. Hyun Juhi wears a cross necklace, Miho heads over to Ashley's gallery. Finding her in the washroom, Miho reports Kyung-suk's murder and also tells her about Dr. Seo's paper being in a cross necklace. Inspecting Dr. Hyun Juhi's necklace, she realizes that it is not the one she is looking for. Angry about being suspected, Dr. Hyun Juhi suggests Miho not to haphazardly draw conclusions before walking away. What both women failed to notice was that the washroom had another occupant who heard the entire conversation. Meanwhile, Chang-ho leaves Big Mouse a message at the prison's chapel to dismiss the medical bail of the VIPs, where the VIPs eagerly wait for Ji-hoon to call with updates about their bail. Chang-ho receives an upside-down chariot card in reply, implying that he has to work on it himself. Dr. Han is forcefully presented before Chang-ho yet again, who tells him that traitors are the worst kind of criminals and warns him not to betray him. At Suntae's office, Gi-gwang works on finding an episode of a health program that Dr. Hyun Juhi was a speaker on recently. While Miho informs Mayor Do-ha of her decision to trust Chang-ho, Gi-gwang then finds the episode. However, Miho notices that Hyejin was also on the show wearing a cross necklace. Quickly looking through Kyung-suk's designs, they spot a match to conclude that Hyejin has Dr. Seo's paper. Elsewhere, Hyejin is thinking back to discovering a chip in her necklace after overhearing the conversation in the washroom. She also thinks of the night she was escaping Dr. Han's wrath when Dr. Seo had helped her. Far away from Dr. Han, she had been taken to Dr. Seo's fishing site and had her wounds tended. This is how the two had found solace and support with each other, and Dr. Seo had then one day gifted her the necklace, which she had promised to treasure forever. All she had now instead was the massive grief of losing Dr. Seo while her husband prepares to leave the prison with the other VIPs. Warden Park escorts them only to be blocked by Chang-ho outside. When Jung mentions that he knows about Dr. Han's plan to confess at the trial, Chun-sek comes forward to claim responsibility, and all inmates leaves Chang-ho's side. Lee then announces that the warden has agreed to hold Dr. Han in solitary till the end of the trial, and both Jung and Lee are now free to bribe the judge without the danger of anybody's confession. Once they make their way out, it seems like Chang-ho can do nothing other than helplessly watch. However, his laughter implies that he fooled everyone, and certainly has planned something else instead. After getting tracker anklets, and a strict warning from the warden, Jung and Lee leave the prison. However, unbeknownst to anyone else, Lee has somehow managed to transfer his anklet to his secretary. As soon as Warden Park leaves for the weekend later, one of the guards, Su Chul, signals to Chun-sek, who gets Dr. Han to the chapel to confront him about his betrayal. After being informed that the cameras in the chapel have been turned off for the night, Chun-sek gets down to business. Dr. Han is immediately tied up and told that Ji-hoon has ordered his punishment. Just then, Chang-ho enters the chapel with his group of inmates, even as Su Chul, who is loyal to Chang-ho, watches the progress from the warden's office. When Chun-sek refuses to cooperate with Chang-ho, a fight breaks out between both clans. A while later, Chang-ho meets Dr. Han in the medical room, implying that he saved his life. This allows him to ask about Dr. Seo's paper. Dr. Han simply warns Chang-ho to stay away from the mess. Despite Dr. Han's refusal to reveal more details, Chang-ho now knows that there is someone else backing Ji-hoon. In the chapel, both groups tend to each other's minor injuries and joke around, proving that the fight was just to intimidate Dr. Han. With Chun-sek's release within the next 3 months, he reminds Chang-ho of their bet about the first among them to leave the prison. Meanwhile, Sun-tae and Gig-wong find Hyejean's place deserted. Miho asks her father to keep looking when an emergency in the cancer ward alerts her. Rushing over, she tries to initiate CPR but is reminded of the non-resuscitation of the patient by the head nurse. With no efforts of saving his life, the patient soon flatlines. Overhearing a conversation in the funeral hall later, Miho learns that the confidentiality clause in the hospital's deal forbids an autopsy as well as a burial. Determined to find what the hospital wanted to hide so desperately, she heads over to the morgue. She manages to get a blood sample and soon exits, only to meet Dr. Juhee and the head nurse outside. When a search of Miho's bag reveals nothing, Dr. Juhee asks for Miho to be searched as well, just as Mayor Doha arrives. Over dinner with his wife later, Mayor Doha is lost in his own thoughts about whether or not to continue helping Chang-ho. At the hospital, meanwhile, Miho retrieves the blood sample from where she hid it inside the morgue. Unfortunately, her elevator gets stuck, causing her to dread being attacked. Suddenly, a masked man with a knife enters the elevator from the shaft and grabs her. She attacks him right back, but he is easily able to overpower her. He ruthlessly strangles her just as the elevator miraculously opens up at the funeral hall to awaiting Mayor Choi. Unsuccessful at blocking the stranger, he chases him but still isn't able to nab him. Returning to the elevator, he checks on Miho, who is relieved to still have the blood sample. Intrigued about solving the mystery of Dr. Seo's paper, he accompanies her to hand it over to one of Gig Wang's contacts at the forensic service. Assuring him that they will know the hospital's motive now, she sincerely thanks him before leaving. At the prison the next day, Warden Park intends to earn costs from the inmates in relation to the items they broke during their fake fight. However, Chang-ho offers to pay for it instead. In the confessional later, hoping to trap Big Mouse, Chang-ho places the chariot card there as a message of a bold act for victory. When someone comes to the confessional then, Chang-ho believes that Big Mouse is finally making himself known, but it turns out to be No Park who informs him of the warden deducting 8 million won for the statue. Expecting a reply from Big Mouse the next day, Chang-ho does not find his tarot card. He then thinks back to when Sun-tae had smuggled in a phone for him hidden in a book, and Chang-ho had asked him to donate a statue with a hidden camera. Hiding in the confessional now, Chang-ho watches all the videos of the previous day and is shocked to see Jerry with the tarot card. This revelation forces Chang-ho to wonder how easily he ignored the one person who has always been by his side since he got to the prison. When he confronts Jerry about taking the tarot card, he insists that he kept it inside the confessional. After angrily dismissing him, Chang-ho watches the video again and realizes that 30 minutes of the footage was missing. Calling Miho, he learns that she received white chrysanthemums, along with a reverse tarot card of the Fool implying a careless act. Since he had sent the same flowers to Ashley, he considers this as a warning for him. What baffles him, though, is how anyone knew about the hidden camera. Meanwhile, realizing that Chang-ho isn't Big Mouse, Jerry asks him for Big Mouse's identity, only to be warned to stay away if he wishes to live. Elsewhere, the meeting to discuss the upcoming trial is interrupted when Ji-hoon is called over to the private theater of their elder, Chairman Kong. Everyone gathers there soon later, including the mayor and his wife. When Ji-hoon asks the mayor whether he spoke to the judge like he promised to, he mentions having been too busy to do so and delegates the task back to him instead. The group is then showed a video detailing the importance of Chairman Kong for the city of Gutcheon. Addressing them later, the chairman expresses his wish of finding an equally deserving successor. Once Mayor Doha and Dr. Juhi leave with the chairman, the others wonder if the mayor is the preferred choice. While they think that Dr. Juhi is the mayor's only connection to Chairman Kong, a childhood photo of him and his family with the chairman proves otherwise. Later that evening, Ji-hoon and the prosecutor discuss a way to catch Big Mouse to ensure that he gets back the money he lost. At the prison the next day, Jerry's younger sister visits him and tells him about having met a kind-hearted sponsor for her studies and for their grandmother's nursing home expenses. As it turns out, this is Ji-hoon's fastest way to get to Big Mouse. With his case dismissed, Jerry can now be immediately released. Returning to his cell, he celebrates the news with everyone and offers an energy drink to all his cellmates. Chang-ho thanks him for his support and is genuinely happy about his release while having the drink. Leaving the prison, Jerry thinks about agreeing to present a specific drink to Chang-ho upon Ji-hoon's assurance that it wouldn't end him. Meanwhile, Chang-ho experiences a severe stomachache and is promptly rushed out in an ambulance. Spotting Miho and Gig-won there to visit Chang-ho, Jerry urges them to follow the ambulance. Miho soon realizes that Chang-ho isn't being taken to a hospital and gets her father to speed up. Gig-won eventually blocks the ambulance, and Miho then directs it to her earlier hospital. While Chang-ho gets tested for possibilities of food poisoning, Miho thanks Jerry, who introduces himself as Jinchul. He tries to refuse the money she offers but eventually gives in to her insistence before leaving. Later, a prison guard sneaks into Chang-ho's room and gets the thumbprint of an unconscious Chang-ho on a document. Handing it over to Ji-hoon and the prosecutor, it is revealed that the document is a request for bail. Meanwhile, Gig-won is denied entry to Chang-ho's room citing rules and security reasons. As a nurse, though, Miho is allowed 10 minutes. In the little time he gets with his wife, an emotional Chang-ho wonders whether their life will ever return to what it once was. He is discharged soon later, and all he can think about is who forced Jerry to drug him. Just when he notices that they weren't headed back to the prison, he fights the guards and attempts to get control of the vehicle. However, he is soon knocked unconscious as the vehicle continues on its way to the Jishung Mental Center. Admitted to the mental center, Chang-ho dreams about having stumbled across Big Mouse. However, lifting the mask off and finding his own face startles him awake to the reality of being restrained. Miho's immediate superior, the head nurse at the Guchun University Hospital, injects him with a drug to make him lethargic and all his fight leaves him. He gains consciousness again in a while to a wholesome meal but with no way to actually have it. All of this, as it turns out, is part of the plan that Ji-hoon hatched with the prosecutor. Ensuring that he doesn't eat or drink anything, Chang-ho is then to be administered with a truth serum called Peace. Fully tiring Chang-ho out, Ji-hoon injects Peace, which causes tremendous pain. His hallucination of a cute mouse soon transforms into a nightmarish room full of rats. In his trance-like state, he honestly admits to not being Big Mouse, but Ji-hoon considers it to be a lie. Passing out under the influence of Peace, Chang-ho revisits his past to when he met Miho for the first time during high school. After getting him out of trouble with her cop father, she had then offered him lunch as well. As an orphan, this was the first time someone stood up for him, and hence he had found a great friend in Miho. Splashed with a bucket of water, Chang-ho is ruthlessly brought back to consciousness and threatened with another dose of Peace. To save himself, he mentions a location marker on the trail of the Gudal Mountain as the hiding place of the money he stole. Chang-ho and Miho had previously taken this trail on a memorable day, where Ji-hoon and the prosecutor now look around in the dark of the night. Young and Lee are put to work digging at the location marker, and the group is soon elated at finding a small trunk but is equally baffled when they see that it contains a singular gold bar. Elsewhere, what seems like the rest of the gold bars and money are safely locked at an unknown location. With Ji-hoon's return to the mental center, Chang-ho realizes that Big Mouse is somehow watching him and trusts that a rescue mission must be underway. At the prison, meanwhile, No Park and Chun-suk wonder what illness could be making random inmates spew blood. Just then, they spot Dr. Han leaving the prison. Being released on bail, he seems upset about not being able to contact his wife, Hyejin. Elsewhere, Gig-won and Soon-tae are also looking for Hyejin when Mayor Doha informs Miho about having located her. Heading there himself, he stops Hyejin from flinging the necklace into the ocean only to find it empty. Miho joins them with Gig-won and Soon-tae, and Mayor Doha leaves soon after hearing about Chairman Kang's deteriorating health. Despite thinking about all the violent episodes with her husband, Hyejin vehemently denies needing help from Miho and even refuses to be a witness at the trial. Elsewhere, checking the chairman's vitals, Dr. Juhi learns that not finding the right candidate to be his successor is causing him major stress. She meets her husband waiting outside and suggests he stay by the chairman's side for the night. Seeing Chairman Kang fast asleep, the mayor seems to be desperate to kill the elder, but he soon manages to put a lid on his overwhelmingly intrusive thoughts and composes himself. Meanwhile, someone with a tattoo on their finger sets fire to a storage room at the mental center, causing the alarm to go off. Seeing his opportunity to escape, Chang-ho attacks his caretaker, who does everything in his power to block him. A fireman knocks the caretaker on his head, and Chang-ho is pleased to see Jerry there to rescue him. However, the caretaker attacks Jerry and repeatedly punches and kicks him till Chang-ho stabs him with a broken piece of glass. Focusing on Chang-ho again, he strangles him while lifting him off the ground, but lets go upon getting poked in his eyes. In a rage, Chang-ho runs into him to knock him down and hurries back to check on Jerry. Together, they head to the parking lot in the basement to escape. The head nurse spots Chang-ho leaving and instructs the security team to follow the car before reporting the incident to an unimpressed Ji-hoon. Jerry drives maniacally through traffic and manages to lose the security team tailing them. He confesses about the spiked drink he gave Chang-ho and promises to elaborate on the remaining details later. Apologizing about everything, he asks Chang-ho to get off and make his escape in another car prepared for him. In the car, Chang-ho finds a change of clothes, some money, and a phone. Meanwhile, Jerry drives back into traffic and gets caught by Ji-hoon's team at a police barricade. Determined to escape, he continues driving through the barricade, intending to evade the security as well as the police. Eventually, Chang-ho also arrives at the barricade and spots Jerry being carried off. Shocked by the loss of his savior, he passes by the barricade without being identified. After making Hyejin an attractive offer, Miho joins Suntae and Gig-won while they discuss a live stream scheduled with an online newscaster when the news reports Chang-ho's escape. Such is Ji-hoon's ploy that he used the medical bail application to have Chang-ho admitted to the mental center, and now that he has lost him, it is being made to look like he escaped during his transfer there. While Chun-sik is pleased to know about his escape, Warden Park seems to be indifferent. However, the people most affected by Chang-ho's escape seem to be the VIPs who are worried about being targeted. Meanwhile, Chang-ho receives a message to head to an unmanned hotel. Stopped on the way for an inspection, he is shocked to be let go even after being identified. What he doesn't see is that the cop has a tattoo under his ear. Arriving at the designated hotel, Chang-ho heads over to the room mentioned in the message and finds a suit and more money. Overcome by emotions over Jerry's loss, Chang-ho decides not to be a mere pawn in Big Mouse's game anymore. After seeing Hyejin off, Miho thinks of a way to contact Chang-ho without the police knowing about it. While Ji-hoon discusses the trial with the VIPs, the prosecutor calls him to inform him about the police tracking Miho's phone. However, he is shocked to see Miho with Gig-won and Suntae staging a protest outside the office of the prosecution. Directing the media's attention towards the prosecutor, Miho demands that Chang-ho's abduction be investigated and readily submits hers, as well as her father's and Suntae's phones, once he orders a thorough search into their call history and emails. The prosecutor is obliged to listen to Miho's demands. As Miho planned, numerous articles about the abduction find their way to Chang-ho, thereby letting him know her location. Ji-hoon is shocked to know that Chang-ho truly contacted none of his family members after his escape. A day before the trial, the trio are still outside the prosecution office while Chang-ho is at a clock tower across the street. Noticing an insurance advertisement opposite her and recognizing its resemblance to their life, Miho calls the number from Suntae's burner phone and reaches Chang-ho. When she tells him that Hyejin has agreed to help them, he asks for her number. The next day, Young freaks out about the online newscaster planning to speak to an informant about their case, and Dr. Han suggests that they focus on their trial instead. Just then, Ji-hoon receives an interesting proposal from Hyejin. She informs him that she would give him Dr. Seo's paper if he could get Dr. Han to divorce her. She also tells him about being in touch with Big Mouse if he can't deliver. Once she sends over the divorce papers she prepared, Young and Lee look through its terms when Dr. Han outright refuses, and Ji-hoon reminds him that the repercussions of Dr. Seo's paper becoming public will be bad for Chairman Kong. The VIPs get to the courthouse soon after, while Mayor Doha realizes that Ji-hoon knows about Hyejin having Dr. Seo's paper. He lets Miho know about it, who attends the trial while also keeping track of the live stream, which has garnered enough curiosity among the general public. Both events begin simultaneously as Chang-ho is seen joining the live stream. Introducing himself as Big Mouse, he offers to make a prediction for the ongoing trial. Introducing himself as Big Mouse Chang-ho, he offers to make a prediction for the ongoing trial. Having been previously appointed as the defendant attorney, he knew the entire plan, which made it easy for him to predict the outcome. This time around, though, he also intends to reveal the corruption within the justice system. With Miho's presence at the trial, it is easily confirmed that Chang-ho's predictions come true, including the prosecutor's evidence and Lee's counterarguments. Eventually, Ji-hoon signals the prosecutor, who requests for a recess. Promptly storming out of the courtroom, Ji-hoon is then informed that blocking Chang-ho's livestream is proving to be difficult. Mayor Doha interrupts the gathering to tell Ji-hoon that Chairman Kong will not appreciate all the attention the case is getting. Just then, from the cafe across the courthouse, Hyejin calls Ji-hoon to bring over the divorce papers. For the sake of Chairman Kong, Ji-hoon then forces Dr. Han to agree to the divorce so they can finally get Dr. Seo's paper in return. Gig-won and Suntae wait downstairs at the cafe, while they see Ji-hoon heading upstairs to meet Hyejin. Once he gets Big Mouse's location from her and relays it to the prosecutor, he hands over the divorce papers in exchange for the original file of Dr. Seo's paper. While the police are dispatched to the abandoned factory unit from where Chang-ho is live streaming, the trial continues and the VIPs are acquitted because of insufficient evidence. Exactly as predicted, Chang-ho insists that the truth cannot be hidden just because the trial is done, and while the police arrive at an incorrect location, Chang-ho proceeds to state that Dr. Seo's unpublished paper is the actual reason for his end. At the cafe, Ji-hoon realizes that he received the wrong paper while the VIPs and the prosecutor speak to the media. Suddenly, an advertising truck arrives and plays the live stream just in time for Chang-ho to say that he will now be presenting irrefutable evidence for the case. Switching to footage from the cafe, it shows Ji-hoon dealing with Hyejin after getting the wrong paper from her. Along with the media, the VIPs watch in shock as Hyejin confesses to knowing the truth. With Ji-hoon gradually losing his temper, his assistant steps in to inform him about being filmed. Ji-hoon immediately spots the camera and proceeds to destroy it. By the courthouse, Chang-ho still isn't done, as the truck screen is raised to reveal him patiently waiting there. Directly approaching the prosecutor, Chang-ho mentions submitting this new video as evidence, and with the media presence around him, the prosecutor is compelled to agree to appeal further. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon is angrily dragging Hyejin away when Mayor Do-ha gets there to stop him. Informing him about the media outside, the mayor asks him to leave quietly. Hyejin gives Soon-tae her divorce papers for further proceedings, and the mayor offers to drop her at the airport and asks Miho to meet Chang-ho. Addressing the media outside the courthouse, Chang-ho confirms that he was indeed abducted and names Ji-hoon and the prosecutor as the culprits just before the police arrive to arrest him. However, an appeal is soon filed for Dr. Seo's case and is transferred to another unit as well. Meanwhile, Chang-ho is taken back to the prison under Warden Park. Just before leaving, Chang-ho had learnt that Jerry is alive. As instructed by Chang-ho then, Soon-tae pays Jerry a visit at the hospital and leaves him a note of his gratitude. However, a doctor with a wrist tattoo switches the notes. After reading the one handed to him, Jerry immediately tears it apart. At the prison, Chun-suk and No Park inform Chang-ho about the strange disease among the inmates that suddenly makes them puke blood and lose control of themselves, which has caused the prison's medical staff to resign. While this seems to have happened before, the disease is also limited to model inmates. Ji-hoon then pays Chang-ho a visit and offers an investment opportunity for him in a development project which would be a win-win situation for both of them. Amused with his confidence, Chang-ho mentions that lobbying for investment at a location where development is forbidden is just an addition to the long list of charges against Ji-hoon. But he is in for a surprise when Ji-hoon assures him that he has absolutely nothing to do with Dr. Seo's end. Meanwhile, the VIPs wait to meet Chairman Kong, and the mayor contemplates joining them. Assuring Dr. Joo-hee that he is clean and has nothing to do with the case, he meets the chairman and hands over a copy of Dr. Seo's paper, along with its original file. Much to the shock of the VIPs, the mayor proudly assures the elder of the elimination of any danger to his legacy. When they confront him about it later, he simply shrugs them off and asks them to confess their crimes to the prosecution. Refusing to back down, they remind him of being their accomplice. As it turns out, it was indeed the mayor who spoke to them after Dr. Seo's end. He had then attempted to put a complete end to everything by arranging their accident, and instead turned it around on them later. In fact, he is also responsible for Chang-ho's accident, which was brought about to ensure the destruction of the dashcam recording, which was the only evidence of his involvement. Later that night, Chairman Kong destroys the last evidence of Dr. Seo's paper. Recalling being against Dr. Joo-hee and Mayor Do-ha's wedding, he now hints at having chosen the mayor as his successor, and asks Joo-hee to support him. Meanwhile, the mayor is seen unlocking a door behind which lays the hidden treasure, thereby leading to the revelation that it was indeed Mayor Do-ha who had earlier buried the gold bars in cement. Further, he also has a copy of Dr. Seo's paper and its file, thereby proving that he lied to the chairman as well. When the mayor had found Hyejin, he had explained to her the power of the paper she held by saying that it will lead to her tragic end. To avoid all the trouble, he had then offered to pay for her to travel to and stay in New York in return for Dr. Seo's paper. Hence, he has had it in his possession before he even informed Miho about finding Hyejin. Early one morning at the prison, Chang-ho leaves a message in the confessional for Big Mouse to meet him the next day for information about Dr. Seo's paper. On his way back to the cell, he spots a bunch of model inmates being released for daily work with a better pay. Meanwhile, Miho is puzzled to see all patients of the ward mysteriously discharged and is simply told to be ready for the new patients arriving in a while. Coincidentally, she comes across blood reports of the prison inmates and remembers noticing separate boxes during their volunteer camp. The head nurse stops her and asks her to urgently meet the director. Dr. Joo-hee mentions knowing about Miho's snooping around and shows her the report of the blood analysis she wanted. Quickly going through the report, Miho apologizes for overstepping, but Joo-hee demands her resignation. Leaving the director's office with her next plan already taking form, she gets a call from Mayor Do-ha asking to meet. Based on the normal report of the blood analysis, she concludes that Dr. Seo's paper has nothing to do with the hospital, and the mayor pretends to agree. Looking to confirm that Hyejin hasn't betrayed him, he asks Miho if she told her anything about Dr. Seo's paper after leaving for New York, replying in the negative. Miho says that maybe she should stop looking into the paper now. At the prison, someone approaches the confessional and reads Chang-ho's message for Big Mouse. Meanwhile, all the inmates are gathered to get their medicines from the hospital staff, where a severely ill-looking Kwang Yin grabs a bottle of vitamins. Having cut into a shorter line, No Park gets to the head nurse's desk, but she realizes that his name isn't on her list and stops him from taking the same vitamins as Kwang Yin. Even as Chang Ho thinks of this as strange, an inmate suddenly throws up blood, which causes a bit of chaos. Later that night, Big Mouse's reply to Chang Ho is seen in the form of the tarot card for justice. While he waits for Big Mouse to show himself, Miho decides to pay Jerry a visit at the hospital but finds his bed empty. Hearing someone approach, Chang Ho turns around and is shocked to see Warden Park there. The warden says that it was he who gave him the list of Big Mouse's real clients but refuses to reveal how he knew to bury gold at the Goodall Mountain Trail. Getting to the point of their meeting, he asks what information Chang Ho has about Dr. Seo's paper. However, Chang Ho continues to doubt his identity as Big Mouse even after the warden reveals his tattoo. Through the warden, he warns Big Mouse to reveal himself or lose Dr. Seo's paper. Glad about having recorded their conversation, Chang Ho seems to have planned to ensure that Big Mouse suffers in the same way he did. Meanwhile, Miho meets Jerry, who offers to be a witness at Chang Ho's upcoming trial. Elsewhere, Mayor Doha is watching Chairman Kang's legacy documentary and gets emotional when he is reminded of the day he lost his grandfather after his car went up in flames. Ji-hoon arrives and points out the similarity between the child in the photograph and the mayor, but mentions that the child lost his life a long time back. Complaining about Mayor Doha's eagerness to be chosen as the chairman's successor, Ji-hoon admits to having underestimated him earlier and warns him about properly opposing him henceforth. Just when Mayor Doha replies that Ji-hoon is not well matched to be his rival, Chang Ho calls to request his presence at his interrogation the next day. Out of vitamins the next morning, Kwang Yin tries to grab some from his cellmate, and they end up getting into a fight. When he continues to instigate his cellmate at lunch later, No Park states that the supplements were getting people into crazy fights, which increases Chang Ho's curiosity about the situation. At the hospital, meanwhile, the head nurse suggests tweaking the medications of the inmates as per the side effects. Dr. Han and the other VIPs ask her to continue following their instructions instead. They then learn from Dr. Juhee that the board will soon be firing all of them, responding to which they suggest her to let them handle the dirty work while remaining clean herself, much like her husband. At the prison the same day, Warden Park is surprised to see Miho's resume among the potential nurses he will be interviewing that afternoon. Meanwhile, Young meets Dr. Juhee in an attempt to change her mind about their dismissal and is told to appeal to the directors themselves. Approaching Lee later, he assures him that she did not notice that they changed the medications. Both of them then ask Dr. Han to speak to the head nurse to ensure that things run smoothly, but overly sad about his divorce, he refuses to participate. At the prison yard, Kwang Yin is uncontrollably shivering and contemplating a fight when Chun-sik and the others spot Miho's arrival. She is taken to the warden's office to find the head nurse along with another colleague, Heeju, already there. When they refuse to work with Miho and vice versa, the warden has a difficult decision to make. Meanwhile, in the yard, Kwang Yin attacks another inmate and proceeds to strangle him as well. Miho is simultaneously asked if she wants to work at the prison because of Chang Ho. But an alarm blaring stops them as Kwang Yin holds the bloody inmate against him, even as Su Chul tries to defuse the situation. Kwang Yin's maniacal laughter makes No Park and Chun-sik wonder if he is under narcotic influence, just as he bites a guard's ear so hard that it draws blood. It takes multiple shots of the taser gun to subdue him, only for Su Chul to find that he has stopped breathing. His call for help is heard in the warden's office, and while the head nurse rushes to locate an emergency defibrillator, Miho gets to the yard to begin CPR. She is asked to stay away once the head nurse gets there with the prison's defibrillator. However, realizing that it is out of batteries, Miho is compelled to resume CPR to eventually resuscitate Kwang Yin. Her effort earns her the warden's favor as he requests her to accompany Kwang Yin to the hospital. During his interrogation at the prosecution office, meanwhile, Chang Ho is assured by the mayor that he will look into dropping charges for his drug case since he truly had nothing to do with it. He then proceeds to play his recorded conversation with the warden for the mayor and the prosecutor. However, he stops it halfway through, promising for the rest to be revealed in court. Stating that he does not believe that the warden is Big Mouse, he then hands over the device to Mayor Doha, even as Ji-hoon intently observes the conversation. Chang Ho then reveals the warden's blackmailing and corruptive ways to suggest that the prosecutor should arrest him, instead of just bringing him on as a testifier. An impressed Mayor Doha instructs the prosecutor to secure an arrest warrant at the soonest. Later, thoroughly amused with the progress of the case, Ji-hoon asks the prosecutor to follow the mayor's instructions. Headed back to the prison, Chang Ho notices an unusual amount of birds around a factory, who then shockingly all drop into the lake below. While he is escorted to solitary confinement, Kwang Yin's reports come back clean, surprising both Miho and Su Chul. When she gets a moment alone, she discreetly gets a fresh blood sample and later hands it over to someone for further testing. The next morning, No Park brings over Chang Ho's food and informs him about Miho's new job at the prison's medical center. Getting to work, she meets the warden, who offers to release Chang Ho from solitary confinement in return for information on Dr. Seo's paper. Once he leaves, Miho then gets no Park to spread the word among the inmates for a blood test. Meanwhile, Chang-ho seeks a meeting with the warden and confronts him about Miho's appointment. Deciding to share information amongst themselves, Chang-ho learns that someone close to Big Mouse met their end due to Dr. Seo's paper, which is the reason for Big Mouse's interest in it. He then informs the warden that the paper has something to do with the blood of the inmates. Granted a meeting with Miho in return, Chang-ho tries to get her to quit immediately because of the potential danger. However, considering he does not have a plan to smuggle out the blood samples of inmates for independent testing, she reminds him of her importance. Just then, they hear the sound of the prosecutor's approaching convoy. Armed with a search warrant, the prosecutor places the warden under arrest for blackmail and extortion. When Warden Park calls Ji-hoon for help, he pretends not to know about anything and asks to speak with the prosecutor. He is then told that the mayor possibly expedited the process. Devoid of any help, the warden is soon taken away. While the inmates of the prison gather around to watch, Chang-ho asks Miho to check everyone carefully to find anyone angry or shocked about the arrest, since they could be Big Mouse. Soon after, the warden's safe is seized along with a lot of other evidence. Later, Chang-ho is asked to meet the interim warden. Much to Warden Park's shock, the prosecutor plays the clip of his conversation with Chang-ho and then informs him that Soo-chul, who is set to take up the position of the interim warden, had sent it to him. When Chang-ho thanks Mayor Doha for his help, he is told that he can be fully trusted only if he catches the real Big Mouse. Leaving work, Dr. Joo-hee sips on her coffee while driving. However, she soon experiences immense discomfort along with a blurring of her vision, causing her to swerve into oncoming traffic. Once the mayor rushes to the hospital following the news, Chang-ho tells Miho that it cannot have just been an accident. He further mentions that their plan might have hit both targets, Big Mouse and Mayor Doha. Ever since Ji-hoon confessed to not being the fourth accomplice, Chang-ho and Miho have been suspecting the mayor and also found that he manipulated the blood analysis report and obtained a normal one. Additionally, requesting the mayor to be present for his interrogation was also a ploy to get Big Mouse to attack him, beginning with Dr. Joo-hee's accident. And now, to nab the mayor, Big Mouse will need Chang-ho's help, for which he will have to reveal himself. This way, Chang-ho plans to get rid of both of them at once. Meanwhile, Mayor Doha reaches the hospital just as the police leave with Dr. Joo-hee's blood sample. While the mayor checks on his wife, Ji-hoon joins the prosecutor later and learns of Dr. Joo-hee's blood report. Promptly calling the chief editor of his newspaper, he instructs him to continuously report the news of narcotics found in the blood test. He then tells the prosecutor that all they had to do now is to patiently wait to nab both Mayor Doha and Big Mouse. Officially taking over the duties of a warden the next day, Soo-chul discontinues Warden Park's grading system and bribes. He even announces the introduction of suggestion boxes across the prison and assures strict confidentiality. Having discussed finding Big Mouse's minions in the prison with Chang-ho earlier, he then conducts a thorough search of all the inmates to look for a tattoo that matches the symbol on the tarot cards. Clearing most of the inmates, he finally comes across the tattoo on 3 of them. Discussing with Chang-ho later, he mentions that there have to be more people involved, since Warden Park could not have had just 3 inmates helping him. Anticipating a difference of opinions between them, Chang-ho reminds Soo-chul of his influence in and out of the prison, and insists that the 3 inmates should not be tortured in an attempt to get further information, and suggests that their communications should be closely monitored instead. Meanwhile, having handed over Kwang Yeon's blood sample to Hyejin earlier, Miho now receives a call from her and learns that the drug found in his blood has caused his white blood cells to triplicate, much like the patients in the cancer ward of the hospital. While Miho asks her to return to Korea soon, someone clicks multiple photographs of Hyejin. Later, Miho's attention is called to an uncontrollable Kwang Yeon, whom she sedates before administering his prescribed medicines. Later, she meets Chang-ho to discuss that the hospital certainly is prescribing different medicines for the model inmates of the prison. After Chang-ho promises to find out more about their work release, entailing cleaning nearby public areas, she meets No Park to confirm bringing around 5 or 6 model inmates every day for a blood test. Elsewhere, Dr. Han receives photographs of Hyejin from his contact abroad and instructs him to keep tracking her. Meanwhile, Dr. Joo-hee is disturbed by the media attention her case is getting as ensured by Ji-hoon. Thinking to himself later, Mayor Doha realizes that Chang-ho must have shifted his loyalties, judging by the attack on his wife. He also concludes that Miho's reason for joining the prison staff must be Dr. Seo's paper, and immediately gets his assistant to track Hyejin. Meanwhile, the prison witnesses the return of Warden Park as an inmate. Betrayed by Soo-chul to get his position, he slaps him and is attacked in return. Soo-chul aggressively lashes out and then orders the 3 minions of Warden Park to be gathered. Torturing them, Soo-chul asks if Big Mouse is in the prison with them. Warden Park replies that none of them, including himself, had ever met Big Mouse, which angers Soo-chul enough to try and kill one of the inmates until Chang-ho saves his life. Unimpressed with Soo-chul's torture tactic, Chang-ho gets him to back down and takes Warden Park to the medical room. While Miho tends to his wounds, Warden Park thanks them both for their help. However, he later refuses to betray Big Mouse to join Chang-ho. Getting to his cell, he is then further attacked by his cellmates as a sign of his grand welcome to the other side. Curiosity getting the best of her, Dr. Juhi finally decides to visit the underground lab with the head nurse. On her way back a while later, she seems traumatized by what she found there and requests Mayor Doha to take her home. On their way, she says that she had never visited the lab before and insists that he not be tainted by its information. This gets him to agree to stop asking what she saw there. The next morning, threatened by the fact that he isn't being considered to truly take over as the prison's warden, Suchul convinces Mayor Doha to let him deal with Chang Ho in his own way to ensure that they do not lose Big Mouse. After getting the go-ahead, he announces to all the inmates that Big Mouse's team members have a tattoo like Warden Park and his minions. Much to Chang Ho's shock, it is even announced that not only is he fake, but also that the real Big Mouse is in the prison. Implementing emergency protocol across the prison till they catch Big Mouse, Suchul then promises a special pardon to anyone who helps. The inmates soon corner Warden Park for the truth and later even question Chang Ho's credibility when Chunsuk steps in for his defense. Thanking him, Chang Ho then rushes over to the warden's office to confront Suchul. However, when the mayor refuses to speak to him, he realizes that catching Big Mouse has now turned into a race. The environment in the prison soon deteriorates with regular searches for contraband and terrible food served to the inmates. Different gangs in the prison break out into fights to such an extent that No Park thinks it will soon lead to a riot. He even wonders about Warden Park's safety as he continues to be bullied and attacked everywhere in the prison. All the while, he keeps helping Miho with collecting the blood samples of the model inmates. One day, a bunch of inmates ruthlessly attack Warden Park even as Chang Ho watches from the warden's office. Leaving a while later, he passes him by without a backward glance since he refused to join him. Meanwhile, Miho picks up Hyejin from the airport, and both women remain unaware of the fact that they are being followed by Dr. Han. Elsewhere, Gigwang and Suntae prepare to gain information about the work release of the model inmates. They decide to go ahead and wait so as not to make it obvious that they are tailing the prison convoy, but they unfortunately miss a turn. The inmates are taken along a service lane to later don body protection suits, and the group then heads further ahead to a basement facility. Elsewhere, Miho leaves Hyejin's accommodation that she booked after promising to return later that evening. While the mayor's assistant finds information about the accommodation in Miho's name, Dr. Han makes his presence known to Hyejin there. Startled, she runs away from him and arms herself with a knife from the kitchen. When this doesn't stop him, an emotionally overwhelmed Dr. Han keeps walking to her and asks her to stab him instead. She tries to run, but he yanks her to him, and blood starts dripping on the floor. At the prison, meanwhile, one of the model inmates informs Miho about having lost considerable weight causing regular dizziness. In the yard outside, Warden Park is surprised to know that Chang Ho is pretending to work with the mayor and hasn't really betrayed Big Mouse. Offering a final notice for Big Mouse through Warden Park, Chang Ho asks him to meet at the chapel that night. In a hospital elsewhere, Jerry requests his doctor to process his discharge. Arriving at Hyejin's place, the mayor comes across her corpse in the middle of the house while Dr. Han seems to be in shock. On the other hand, Dr. Juhi is on her way to an auction where Ji-hoon and his wife Ashley plan to outperform the mayor and his wife to earn the chairman's favor. Overly confident about Dr. Juhi being dropped by the chairman for her drug case, everyone is shocked when she walks in with Chairman Kong himself and orders the space to be cleared for them. Going through Hyejin's messages with Miho, Mayor Doha finds out that he has been lied to and that they are indeed testing blood samples. Immediately calling Suchul, he instructs him to finish off Chang Ho and Miho that night. Unknown to the threat to their lives, Miho continues working while Chang Ho waits at the chapel when he receives a message asking him to head to the VIP den. Meanwhile, Suchul's plan is put into action and instigated by the bad food served to the inmates. The prison goes up in an uproar. A guard loyal to Suchul discreetly passes a keycard over to one of the inmates, allowing him to open the cell doors of his fellow inmates, which eventually leads to a riot. Soon, it becomes increasingly difficult for the guards to control the inmates, even as Chunsuk asks his group to stay put to avoid getting in trouble. Handing over a gun to his guard, meanwhile, Suchul instructs him to corner Miho in the medical room. They plan to ensure that Miho loses her life just to say that it happened amidst the chaos of the riot. Soon, the prison's power is cut off and Chang Ho senses someone having joined him. Using a lighter to see better, he is shocked to see that No Park is the real Big Mouse. Unable to get through to Hyejin, Miho sends her a text instead about a possible delay in their meeting due to the prison's power outage. As his assistant clears the crime scene, Mayor Doha nonchalantly responds and requests to reschedule for the next day. Miho doesn't have much time to ponder over the cryptic reply as an alarm blares through the prison, and armed guards rush towards the rioting inmates who are now demanding to see Suchul. In the VIP den, the usually cheerful No Park has transformed into Big Mouse, proving his identity by explaining the tarot cards he used. Since Warden Park was unable to do this earlier, Chang Ho seems satisfied with the truth. No Park assures him that he was not involved with Mayor Doha choosing him to be the defending attorney for the VIPs, but had eventually been compelled to make him Big Mouse to save his life. Explaining his interest in Dr. Seo's paper, he says that he has lost faith in the law, which is why he hopes to bring the culprits of his daughter's demise to justice himself. Unwilling to remain completely helpless, Chang-ho proposes an offer which surprises No Park. Before giving him an answer though, he is alerted to the potential danger Miho faces and he promptly directs Chang-ho to the medical room. Miho is checking on Kwang Yin when she gets a call from her husband asking her to urgently leave the prison. Once she exits his ward, Kwang Yin attempts to free himself from the handcuffs securing him to the bed. Reaching the medical room, Miho retrieves the blood samples and rushes to the exit only to find the access door locked. As Chang-ho advises her to hide in the medical room, he is ambushed by Su Chul's guards. He defends himself in the ensuing confrontation while Miho barricades the medical room's entrance. Outnumbered, Chang-ho struggles against the guards until Chun-sik and a few others intervene. As they handle the guards, Chun-sik provides Chang-ho with an opportunity to reach Miho, who readies a sedative to use against potential attackers. Warden Park and No Park then guide Chang-ho through an alternate route to the medical room. Meanwhile, Miho sedates one of her attackers only for another to push through the door. She attacks him with a fire extinguisher and is knocked down by another. While he looms over her with a knife, Kwang Yin intervenes. He then attempts to kill the attacker until he is shot by a guard. But surprisingly, he gets back up to save Miho again until Su Chul arrives at the medical room. While she tends to Kwang Yin's wound, he tries to defend Miho again but is soon incapacitated. Sensing Chang-ho's approach, Su Chul turns around to fire at him. Overwhelmed by the fear of losing his wife, Chang-ho then attacks Su Chul till Miho urges him to stop. While Chang-ho is relieved at finding her unharmed, Warden Park ends Su Chul's life. At Ashley's gallery, Dr. Joo-hee and Chairman Kong question Ji-hoon about his publication being the first to release the news of her test report. Ji-hoon denies any intention of hindering Mayor Do-ha's pursuit of Big Mouse and assures everyone that time will justify his actions. When the mayor joins them, the chairman offers to safeguard Dr. Joo-hee, allowing Mayor Do-ha to continue his pursuit without fearing retaliation from Big Mouse. Dr. Joo-hee then requests to assume Dr. Seo's former role as the Audit Committee Commissioner. Despite Ji-hoon's displeasure, the chairman agrees, appreciating her interest in the business. After the chairman departs, Ji-hoon questions Dr. Joo-hee's sudden change and warns her not to cross him. Mayor Do-ha responds angrily, but Dr. Joo-hee, managing her husband's anger, warns Ji-hoon of the impending end of his glory days before leaving. At the prison, Chang-ho cuffs No Park in the medical room, which is now surrounded by guards. He then calls Ji-hoon with an offer which calms his anger. Meanwhile, failing to reach Su Chul, Mayor Do-ha heads to the prison himself, where Warden Park announces to the guards outside the medical room about holding Chang-ho and Miho hostage. The mayor's arrival at the prison is followed by police backup led by Ji-hoon. The prosecutor then proceeds to inform the guards about Big Mouse's presence in the prison, and asks for him to be escorted out, as they intend to immediately arrest him. Chang-ho's offer to No Park from earlier is revealed to be a ploy to have him arrested to gain leverage against the culprits of his daughter. With the guards standing down, they're allowed to pass through and No Park is taken away by the prosecution team. Ji-hoon appreciates Chang-ho's help and receives the blood samples from Miho that she mentions worked as bait to catch Big Mouse. In return for Chang-ho's betrayal of the mayor, Ji-hoon gets the prosecution to drop all charges against him. Now a celebrated hero for catching a big-time criminal, Chang-ho celebrates his freedom with his family at the new office of his legal firm with Suntae. During their discussion, it is revealed that the actual blood samples of the model inmates are safe while the ones they handed over to Ji-hoon belong to Chang-ho, No Park, and Warden Park. However, when Miho mentions that Hyejin might be missing, Gig-won worries about her fate. Intending to build on the attention he is receiving, Chang-ho decides to represent Big Mouse. Meeting Mayor Do-ha on his way out to the press conference he called for, he challenges the mayor since he was the one who dragged Chang-ho into this mess. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon meets the chairman and gains his approval for catching Big Mouse. Pleased about his efforts, Chairman Kong offers to transfer his shares to gift Ji-hoon complete control of the publication he heads. However, they are interrupted before he can sign the agreement, as Dr. Joo-hee brings their attention to Chang-ho's press conference just in time for him to announce his representation of Big Mouse as a way to investigate Dr. Seo's demise. He even hints at a powerful figure involved with the case who continues to remain hidden. Upon further hearing that Chang-ho will soon be applying for Big Mouse's bail, Chairman Kong angrily retracts his gift and asks Ji-hoon to return when the job is properly done instead. Miho confronts Dr. Han about Hyejin's whereabouts but doesn't get any answers. Expressing her concerns to her father, she then informs him about heading over to investigate the location of the model inmate's work. While Chang-ho stays back to deal with Ji-hoon, Gig-won and Suntae leave for Miho's support. Ji-hoon then offers Chang-ho a golden opportunity to join the chairman's family in return for helping them retrieve the money swindled by Big Mouse. Having an upper hand now, though, Chang-ho demands that Chairman Kong personally make the offer instead. Meanwhile, Miho arrives at the location and spots Kwang Yin looking uneasy among the waiting inmates. From afar, she can only observe them approaching a tunnel before it is shut. Inside, the inmates proceed to the underground facility, while Kwang Yin continues to struggle on the way. Soon, a deep rumbling echoes through the ground while a sudden explosion startles Miho, and she sees a few inmates stumbling out of the tunnel. Ignoring her father's instruction to stay put till he reaches there, she enters the tunnel, intending to look for Kwang Yin. Helping a few inmates out to safety, She eventually spots him among the debris of the freshly made crater in the ground. Cautiously making her way across, she helps him up and they begin to make their way out. A while later, Mayor Doha informs Chairman Kong that there have been no casualties due to the accident. The chairman mentions the inherent dangers of NF9 as informed by the research center's head, who was also his friend. Despite the warning, Chairman Kong had persisted in applying for a patent, ignoring the potentially disastrous nature of the substance. However, the chairman is unaware of the fact that his friend was Mayor Doha's grandfather, who had later tragically lost his life in a fire. Since then, Mayor Doha has done everything to be successful and powerful enough to one day be able to seek justice. Now assuring Chairman Kong that he will personally deal with the situation appropriately, he requests him to let Big Mouse be released on bail. No Park is eventually granted a $3 billion conditional bail, which includes house arrest and an electronic anklet. Chang-ho accompanies him to his restaurant, surprisingly adorned with Big Mouse's sign. He is then asked to return the following night to meet the person who urged No Park to save him. He leaves soon after, but unfortunately, No Park's life abruptly ends in a massive explosion. Simultaneously, Mayor Doha lets the chairman know that while Big Mouse has met his end, Chang-ho is still alive. In a false sense of security, Chairman Kong believes that Chang-ho will not be a cause of threat anymore. Nonetheless, determined to finish Chang-ho to ensure that he doesn't get in his way later, Mayor Doha puts a target on his back through a hired hand named Waterfowl. Meanwhile, Chang-ho thinks back to the promise he made to No Park about never giving up on the case. Unknown to him, he is followed by Waterfowl on his way back to No Park's restaurant. Looking around the destroyed place, he is suddenly attacked by a deranged Waterfowl. Struggling against being overpowered, Chang-ho is saved when a stranger knocks Waterfowl out. Jerry gets there soon after and assures him of Miho's safety as she and Gig Wong are escorted to a hotel run by Big Mouse's organization. Chang-ho then accompanies Jerry to Big Mouse's funeral, where other core members of the organization have also gathered. Spotting Warden Park there, Chang-ho learns that he was recently granted bail. A video is then played in which No Park transfers his authority to Chang-ho and announces him as the new Big Mouse. Stunned at the news himself, Chang-ho is further shocked when Warden Park accuses him of having faked the video. Surprisingly then, Soon-tae proves the authenticity of the video by announcing that he filmed it. He then asks Chang-ho if he is ready to accept his new role. Still dealing with the fact that his friend is involved with Big Mouse, Chang-ho faces the gathering and makes his decision. Meanwhile, Mayor Doha learns of Waterfowl's apparent accidental death and is compelled to think if Chang-ho made it happen. Chang-ho is alone later with Soon-tae when he confronts his friend about being used this whole time, revealing that he asked Big Mouse to save his life. Soon-tae urges Chang-ho not to give the other members any reason to doubt his intentions, and asks him to confirm his decision the next day. Chang-ho then heads over to the hotel where his wife and Gig Wong are waiting for him. When he asks for their opinion on whether he should drop the case, Gig Wong is all for being done with everything related to Big Mouse. Miho, on the other hand, insists that they should see it through for the sake of the patients who lost their lives. Agreeing with her, Chang-ho informs Soon-tae of his acceptance of the role of Big Mouse the next day, till they take down the culprits of No Park's daughter. Filling him in, Soon-tae says that she used to be a freelance reporter who went missing while working on exposing Chairman Kang's private investment for him, and that all they found 3 years later was her skeleton and her notebook mentioning Dr. Seo and his paper. Apparently, Dr. Seo lost his life just before his interrogation, and while Peter Hong was Big Mouse's spy, he ran away with the money of the forum and had to be silenced before he exposed the organization. Quenching Chang-ho's curiosity about being watched at the mental hospital, Soon-tae informs him that Warden Park had bugged Ji-hoon's phone so they knew where to bury the gold bar. As his first official command as Big Mouse, Chang-ho demands looking into everything there is to know about Chairman Kong. A few days later, Jerry updates them on everyone linked to Chairman Kong, highlighting his significant influence in Guchin City through various businesses. Miho suggests they can take him down, pointing out the city's unusually high cancer rates, which directs their focus to NK chemicals. Miho then recalls the burst pipes incident when she rescued Kwang Yin, and asks her father, Gig Wong, if he investigated it. He dismisses her concerns, noting the pipes were part of a fish farm, not a threat. Meanwhile, Dr. Juhee's unease grows as she delves deeper into the chairman's confidential business reports. Over a strained dinner later that evening with her husband and Chairman Kong, she suggests shutting down the chemical company. Infuriated at her extreme view, the chairman leaves. Alone with her husband then, Dr. Juhee expresses her frustration and disappointment over the tragic loss of life caused by NF9. To her shock then, her husband confesses the truth about Dr. Seo's demise and even tells her about the bargain he had to strike with the chairman for his permission to marry her. He says that he had to pledge his unwavering obedience to Chairman Kong and assures her that he has never regretted their marriage. Back at the hospital a while later, a determined Dr. Juhee instructs the head nurse and the head of security to get rid of the underground lab immediately. The next morning, Miho learns that the lab has been destroyed even as Dr. Juhee oversees the dumping of its waste, thereby getting rid of all the incriminating evidence. She then goes over to the chairman's place where everyone expects her to be scolded for her rash decision. However, she calmly explains that since Dr. Seo's paper isn't a secret anymore, the lab had become an easy target, adding that she can now discreetly build a new one instead. She is able to please the chairman. Much to Ji-hoon's displeasure, she then requests for Chairman Kang's shares in Ji-hoon's publication. On their way out, when Mayor Do-ha thanks his wife for her actions, she reminds him that she hasn't regretted being married to him either. After his refreshing swim a while later, he is suddenly attacked by two men in the shower room. While he manages to hold them off and eventually take them down, his arm is wounded. Meanwhile, a recently released Chun-sek walks into a new, unopened restaurant to meet Chang-ho and his crew. He's offered the ownership of the place, but the news is interrupted by Jerry's announcement of Warden Park's attack on the mayor. Chang-ho later learns that Warden Park recently bought a junkyard and the allegiance of a local gang. Sun-tae reminds him that Warden Park is among the members of the organization who do not trust him yet, and so, accompanied by Jerry and Chun-sek, Sun-tae is infuriated, which leads to him proving why he is second only to Big Mouse in the organization. Knocking the warden unconscious, Sun-tae gets him in a car and has it doused in kerosene, with his chilling nonchalance being in complete contrast to his earlier self. Sun-tae is stopped only by Chang-ho's call. A thoroughly shaken Warden Park is then presented to Chang-ho, who assures him of the revenge he has planned and his utter disinterest in leading the organization after. At the library the next day, Miho looks into old articles about NF9's invention. Joined by Gig-wong and Jerry, she soon comes across a news report about the death of the lab director, Mr. Cho. Jerry digs around and finds that Mr. Cho's son was imprisoned for illegal waste disposal from his dye factory, and eventually died soon after while his grandson had unfortunately drowned in a river. Later, Miho heads over to a nursing home to meet Mr. Cho's brother-in-law, who turns out to be a distraught old man mourning for his grandson named Do-ha. Recognizing Mayor Do-ha's name, Miho then meets Gig-wong, who confirms that the mayor is the old man's guardian. She is then reminded of her conversation with the mayor when he told her about his father owning a dye factory. Leaving the hospital, meanwhile, Mayor Do-ha faces a media frenzy. Surprising everyone, he announces that he will not be running for the mayor's office again and instead plans to join a political party to run for the National Assembly. Chang-ho then asks Sun-tae to arrange for a press conference and then invites Ji-hoon over. At the press conference, Chang-ho shockingly declares his independent candidacy for the mayor's office. Meeting Ji-hoon later, Chang-ho asks for his support. Already at odds with the mayor and his wife, Ji-hoon is further intrigued when Chang-ho demands a meeting with the chairman. Immediately going over to the chairman's place, they see Mayor Do-ha already there. Chang-ho respectfully introduces himself to Chairman Kong while the mayor and Ji-hoon eagerly wait to hear what he has to say. Shockingly, Chang-ho turns the game on its head by appealing for help from the chairman. He says that a new Big Mouse has taken over the organization and is blackmailing him to avenge No Park's end. He then honestly tells the chairman about the connection between Dr. Seo's paper and the demise of No Park's daughter. Delivering his bravest demand, Chang-ho asks to be made Gyeongbokgu's mayor while promising to use the power that comes with it in the chairman's favor. He even presents an excerpt of the list of the organization's members, saying that there are many more across the city. Intrigued by Chang-ho's demeanor, the chairman invites him and Miho over for his upcoming birthday, implying his willingness to trust him. Outside, Chang-ho thanks Ji-hoon for his help and decides to return the favor. Telling him about Big Mouse never having swindled their 100 billion won, he hints at the money being closer than he thinks. Meanwhile, Miho meets Kwang Yin in prison to ask about his well-being. When he asks her if her gums or nose bleeds suddenly, she tells him no. He then refuses to tell her anything about the work of the model inmates and asks her not to get involved with the scary people responsible for it. Before leaving, however, he asks her to look for his siblings to find out whether his mother got the bone marrow transplant she has been waiting for. Later, having tracked down their address to a surprisingly swanky building, Miho and her father wait in the basement after being denied entrance. Finally spotting Kwang Yin's siblings, Miho is taken aback by his brother's surprisingly unresponsive behavior. Speaking to the sister instead, Miho learns that their mother has passed away. Moreover, the sister even pleads for Miho never to come back again before leaving with her brother. Elsewhere, Chang-ho is on his way to Chun-sek's restaurant with Jerry and Sun-tae when they realize that they are being followed. Choosing to allow the tale, Chang-ho arrives at the restaurant where he is greeted by the members including Warden Park. Ordered by the mayor to track them, his assistant promptly sends back a video to him. A while later, Warden Park leaves the restaurant after speaking with Chang-ho and is invited over to meet Mayor Do-ha. Informing Warden Park about Chang-ho's meeting with the chairman, the mayor shows him the list of members he had provided. The two then strike a deal to band together to take Chang-ho down. Back at the nursing home, Miho and her father try to get more information about Mr. Cho's grandson from his brother-in-law. He points at one of the young boys in the photo to be his grandson Do-ha and says that the other boy is Sung-hyun, Mr. Cho's grandson. He also confirms that his grandson is the one who drowned and lost his life. Later, Chang-ho suspects that Mayor Do-ha, who is actually Sung-hyun in disguise, has been alongside Chairman Kong for revenge, especially after Mr. Cho's mysterious death following his warnings about NF9's dangers. Meanwhile, Chairman Kong is going through his will when he is told about his son having sent him a gift from the US. He promptly orders it to be thrown out and thinks back to the disturbing paintings his son used to make. He strictly instructs his assistant not to let him return to Korea even after he passes. Warden Park, meanwhile, learns about Mayor Do-ha's identity theft from Chang-ho, who then instructs him to discreetly get Mr. Do-ha from the nursing home. When Jerry asks if he should accompany Warden Park, Chang-ho insists that they had to trust him first for him to trust them in return. Nonetheless, Jerry still follows Warden Park and sees him get Mr. Do-ha from the nursing home. However, he is soon knocked out from behind and shut in the trunk of one of Warden Park's cars. Meanwhile, Miho and Chang-ho get ready to leave for the chairman's birthday when Warden Park calls him from an abandoned swim club. Asking Miho to get to the party on her own, Chang-ho assures her that Ji-hoon will help her. Proving him right, Ji-hoon greets Miho when she arrives moments before Chairman Kong enters the celebration. Miho is then introduced to the chairman by Ji-hoon, while Mayor Do-ha gets confirmation of Chang-ho soon meeting his end from Warden Park. A while later, Chairman Kong is engrossed in a conversation with Miho when Mayor Do-ha suddenly gets a call and leaves the party. Quickly heading over to his assistant, he then joins a video call to see Chang-ho tied up and at the mercy of Warden Park. Meanwhile, Jerry manages to unlock the trunk and get out, only to see Chang-ho's car there as well. While Chang-ho tries to get Warden Park to realize that Mayor Do-ha is responsible for No Park's demise, Jerry tries to call Chang-ho and eventually informs Soon-tae about Warden Park's betrayal. Chun-sik then rallies his men alongside Big Mouse's crew. They all get into their cars and go to save Chang-ho. With Mayor Do-ha still watching, Warden Park aims his gun at Chang-ho and fires just as Jerry gets there. Skillfully tackling a few assailants, he makes his way back out while Dr. Joo-hee finds her husband to then see the chairman off together. Leaving the party, Miho learns of Chang-ho's demise from Jerry, who also tells her about Warden Park's collusion with the mayor. Grief-stricken and enraged, Miho lunges at Mayor Do-ha, but he remains unfazed and simply shrugs her off. Ji-hoon rushes over to Miho as she faints, even as the truly vile mayor maniacally laughs at his success. Once he reaches Warden Park's location, the two speak of the mayor's patience since he was a child, all for the sake of revenge. Unknown to the mayor, the chairman has a front row seat to this conversation as he witnesses the two-faced reality of Mayor Do-ha. Even more shockingly, Chang-ho is seated right beside him, alive and well. Promising Chang-ho anything he wants in return for not revealing this massive secret, the chairman then asks his secretary to call Mayor Do-ha over. Soon after, Chang-ho rushes to the hospital where Miho is admitted after the shock of losing her husband. Relieved to see him there, once she gains consciousness, she quickly gets over her emotions and demands to know the entire truth. Chang-ho tells her that everything was a ploy to nab the mayor, which includes faking being shot by Warden Park. While Chairman Kong waits for Mayor Do-ha, he speaks to his secretary about his friend, Mr. Cho. Unknown to the chairman, Mayor Do-ha replaces the secretary and hears about the chairman's fear of NF9's truth being exposed along with his guilt over ending his own friend. Speaking of seeking forgiveness, he begins to experience chest pains and the mayor makes his presence known, heavily hinting at the chairman's pain through the contaminated drip attached to him. Mayor Do-ha insists that the grief his family went through was much worse. Once the chairman passes away, his secretary opens the safe and is instructed by the mayor to get his will notarized and executed without any changes. The next day, everyone is gathered at Chun-sik's restaurant when they catch the news reporting the chairman's sudden demise due to a heart failure. Ji-hoon attends the funeral with Ashley, and objects to Mayor Do-ha and Dr. Joo-hee being the chief mourners. Dr. Joo-hee gets angry at his continued stubbornness, and Ashley urges Ji-hoon to pay his respects to avoid causing a scene. Later, he discusses the chairman's inheritance with the VIPs. While everyone agrees that his murderous son would not be included, they wonder if Dr. Joo-hee would be the chosen successor instead. Chang-ho's arrival in the funeral hall, a while later leading the members of the organization, becomes somewhat of a spectacle for everyone gathered. After paying his respects, he addresses the mayor by his real name, Sung-hyun, and then whispers about knowing his deeds while promising to reveal the truth. Meanwhile, Miho is brushing her teeth when she notices blood and is immediately reminded of Kwang Yin, asking if she had problems with a bleeding nose or gums. When her nose starts bleeding as well, she has to face the fact that she might have been exposed to NF9 while saving Kwang Yin. Once Chang-ho leaves, Dr. Joo-hee asks her husband why he was called by a different name. Still keeping up the act, Mayor Do-ha simply tells her that he will explain it to her later. Meanwhile, the VIPs discuss the possibility of Chang-ho not being made mayor, as he has now suddenly lost the chairman's support. Discreetly leaving them, Ji-hoon joins the prosecutor to meet Attorney Young, the chairman's lawyer. Asking to see the contents of the will beforehand, Ji-hoon learns that Chairman Kong had given everyone an equal share in his inheritance. He attempts to bribe the lawyer to make a change in the will only to be turned down. Once the lawyer leaves, Ji-hoon expresses his disappointment at the apparent fair distribution of the estate, but is consoled by the prosecutor that at least his fear of the mayor messing with the will to get a higher share did not materialize. When Chang-ho calls Ji-hoon to discuss the upcoming election, he cuts him off and asks him to deal with it himself now that the chairman is no more. He faces the consequences of such an abrupt switch in the parking lot later when he is scared first by a bunch of Chang-ho's men and then by Chang-ho himself. Initially thinking that he is going to be abducted, Ji-hoon is slightly surprised when Chang-ho informs him that the chairman did not have a cardiac arrest. Hinting that Ji-hoon will change his mind after the reading of the will, Chang-ho warns him not to contact him later as he severed their trust. Confident about no such thing happening since he had seen the will already, Ji-hoon sees Chang-ho off. Once on his own, he celebrates getting a 36% shareholding in NK Chemical. Everyone gathers at the will's reading later at Ashley's galley, blissfully unknown to the fact that Chang-ho and the others are following the proceedings as well. Ji-hoon and the VIPs plan to band together to oust Mayor Do-ha and Dr. Joo-hee. When the arrival of Attorney Young silences the gathering before beginning, the lawyer's associate Attorney Kim introduces himself as the chairman's legal representative. Upon Ji-hoon's objection, Mr. Young clarifies that Chairman Kong had written up a new will a week before his sudden demise. The reading of the will reveals that the chairman's shares in Ji-hoon's publication along with a few other companies have been left for Dr. Joo-hee. Additionally, shares of NK Chemical and several similar subsidiaries are allotted to Mayor Do-ha, shocking Ji-hoon and the VIPs, while they look at the will themselves and lament their losses. The mayor and his wife make to silently leave, only to be stopped by an enraged Ji-hoon. Accusing him of tampering with the will, he attempts to attack but is held back by Attorney Young. Watching the chaos unfold, Gig-won concludes that Chang-ho was right in predicting that the mayor is responsible for the chairman's demise, seeing as NK Chemical now belongs to him. Just then, Miho gets a call from the hospital she was admitted to and is asked to come in for a checkup since her blood test reports were not favorable. While Dr. Joo-hee and Mayor Do-ha peacefully make their way back home from the mess they left behind, Ji-hoon is on his own letting out all his anger. Despite Chang-ho's warning not to contact him after the reading, Ji-hoon calls him. Chang-ho adds to his desperation by ignoring the call, which forces Ji-hoon to come over in person to offer his help in the mayoral race. Learning about Mayor Do-ha's stolen identity, Ji-hoon is confident of being able to overthrow him once he reveals the truth to the members of the NR Forum, while Chang-ho offers his help to legally get rid of Mayor Do-ha in return for being made mayor himself. Mayor Do-ha decides to run for mayor again with Dr. Joo-hee's support and trust. While both camps kick off the campaign season, Miho visits the hospital for her checkup and the official diagnosis of her stage 4 cancer. Hiding her worries for Chang-ho's sake, she partakes in celebrating his climb in the race with him later that evening. She discusses keeping things from each other out of consideration sometimes. Asking if he is Big Mouse, Miho is surprised to know that he agreed to the role only till Mayor Do-ha is taken down. Asking him to be a kind Big Mouse who helps people live better lives, she decides to keep the biggest secret from her husband and instead chooses to reminisce about their good times. Shocked to know that the mayor had rallied NR Forum members onto his side despite knowing his dark truth, Ji-hoon is further infuriated when they offer to support his mayoral campaign as well. Facing a dismissal threat from Dr. Joo-hee, he tries to reveal her husband's misdeeds only to be told that she knows everything. What she does not know, however, is that she continues to be played by Mayor Do-ha because of her trust. So strong is her trust in him that she refuses to see that even marrying her was just part of his revenge, with nobody on his side. Ji-hoon warns Mayor Do-ha of the trouble he is about to cause before leaving in a huff. Meeting Chang-ho, he then hands over information of Mayor Do-ha's preferential treatment in favor of the various businesses owned by NR Forum's members. Desperate enough to take the mayor down, Ji-hoon even agrees to Chang-ho's suggestion of finding Chairman Kang's demon-like son to claim his inheritance. He meets the prosecutor later and asks him to find the murderous guy, and even lets slip that someone else had been imprisoned in his place while he escaped to America. Elsewhere, Kwang Yin is rushed to the hospital, and Miho is informed of him being in palliative care soon after. Meeting him before his siblings, Miho lies about his mother doing well after her bone marrow transplant. Relieved, Kwang Yin breathes his last while thanking Miho. Later, Kwang Yin's sister confesses the truth about him having taken the fall for a rich psychopath in return for their mother to have the surgery. Enraged, Miho goes over to Dr. Joo-hee to confront her about the limit of the hospital's wrongdoings. Threatening to reveal the truth, Miho promises to bring about a change to prove Dr. Joo-hee wrong. Later, she spends some time with Chang-ho as he prepares for the mayoral debate. The next morning, Young informs Mayor Do-ha about the cryptocurrency fraud from a few months ago and says that the culprit has now been found and the case's prosecutor, Mr. Jaeon, is brought over for lunch with Mayor Do-ha that day. Asking for Mr. Jaeon's help, the mayor expresses his wish for Chang-ho to fall out of the mayoral race. Elsewhere, Young is at the broadcasting station while Sun-tae represents Chang-ho for the briefing of the debate topics. Noticing a section named Citizens Representative that has never been featured before, Sun-tae is informed that the audience members will be allowed to ask questions at the end of the debate. Clearly something Mayor Do-ha and his team will set up to try and destroy Chang-ho's reputation. Soon later, the news reports Mr. Jaeon's discovery of Chang-ho having received a large sum of money from the cryptocurrency culprit in return for losing the trial. Ji-hoon confirms that Mayor Do-ha is behind it all, as he won the previous election through similar tactics. That night, Miho thinks back to when she was exposed to NF9 and the suspicious pipes that supposedly belonged to a fish farm, and decides that the secret of NK chemical and NF9 is a substantial weapon to be used in retaliation against Mayor Doha. Once Miho sees Chang-ho off to the debates rehearsal the next morning, Jerry confirms that something is certainly suspicious about the fish farm she had asked him to look into. He tells her that the intense security is unlike any other fish farm, and that its owner, Mr. Ko, used to be NK Chemical's head of security. Gathering a team, Jerry and Miho then head to the fish farm even as the debate kicks off. Soon enough, Chun-sik and his troops make quite an entrance at the fish farm, bursting through the gates and overwhelming the security. While the manager rushes to alert the owner, the security attempts to control the situation but to no avail. Miho waits in the safety of her car, even as the might of Chun-sik's team is unleashed, eventually leading to overwhelming the fish farm's security into submission. After letting the owner know about the arrival of gangsters on the property, the manager takes the back door to find a hiding place outside. The owner, Mr. Ko, isn't as lucky, since even when he tries his best to hide in his office, he is soon dragged out. Meanwhile, at the debate, Chang-ho mentions the special accommodations Mayor Doha made for the businesses owned by members of the NR Forum. Denying any kind of preferential treatment, the mayor insists that the amount of profits brought in by the recipients of the special schemes is all for improving Gutcheon City. When Chang-ho tries to counter-argue, he is cut off by the moderator despite having some time left to make his point. Back at the fish farm, Miho asks Mr. Ko about NK Chemical's relation to his work. When he denies any such thing, Miho hints at the water she offered him earlier being the safe groundwater he claims they use. His reaction proves the fishy business going around, as he demands to be taken to the hospital immediately. Miho has some of the water to prove that it is indeed safe, and gets him to give up his lies, leading to the revelation that the fish farm indeed uses wastewater with large amounts of radiation generated from the refining process of NK Chemical's NF9. From his hiding place, the manager informs Jung about a bunch of gangsters knowing their dirty secret. Meanwhile, Mayor Doha mentions the cryptocurrency case during the debate and forces Chang-ho to agree to step down from the election if his corruption is proven. Jung drags Lee away from the debate to inform him about the disaster unfolding at the fish farm. Instructing the mayor's assistant to gather a team, Jung decides to head there while Lee stays back. On the other hand, Jerry updates Suntae about their massive revelation. At the debate, meanwhile, Chang-ho bulldozes Mayor Doha about his affiliation with NK Chemical, NF9's dangers, and the city having 20 times more cancer patients. He even brings up Mr. Cho's demise, stating that it is shrouded in mystery. The mayor doesn't have to reply though, as Chang-ho runs out of time. Meanwhile, Mr. Ko records a testimony confirming that the fish farm was formed as a front to dump NK Chemical's wastewater. Insisting that they dispose all the fish, he also confirms getting paid by NK Chemical through an international paper company, right as they gather evidence from the office including the accounting ledgers of the fish farm clearly showing all the money transfers. Jung and his hired thugs arrive. Chun-sik urges Miho and Jerry to head to the broadcast station while getting his team to tackle the new arrivals. Jung spots Miho and Jerry leaving and immediately follows them. While Lee suggests calling the cops to stop their advance, Miho sends Mr. Ko's testimony to Suntae, who thinks of adding her to the list of citizen representatives for the end of the debate. It is then the matter of a power battle when Lee calls the chief of police to pull some strings and Suntae calls Warden Park. Jerry is soon flagged down by the police, which pleases Jung as it looks like Lee's idea worked. But his relief is short-lived as he gets stuck in an inspection ahead and witnesses Jerry and Miho being escorted on their way by the police instead, courtesy of Warden Park's affiliation with the chief of police. Meanwhile, after spotting Mr. Min, the culprit of the cryptocurrency fraud, Suntae anticipates trouble and promptly gets Miho added to the group of citizen representatives with the help of the station head, who is revealed to be part of Big Mouse's organization. At the debate, Mr. Min offers proof of Chang-ho's corruption in the form of the serial numbers of the currency notes seized from Chang-ho's office. Assuring Mayor Doha of proving his innocence, Chang-ho states letting the public decide whether he should withdraw from the election later. Arriving right on time, Miho then introduces herself as the next representative and claims to be a victim of NK Chemical's radiation. Shocking everyone including her father and Chang-ho, she announces that she was exposed to the radiation during the accident when the underground pipe broke. Her confession of being terminally ill shocks Chang-ho even as Mr. Ko's testimony is played, followed by Miho asking Mayor Doha whether this is the reason he is lobbying for the Special Substance Management Bill to be repealed. Putting up an act, Mayor Doha suggests that the case be investigated without sanctuary if Mr. Ko's testimony is proven right. After the debate ends, Jerry takes Chang-ho over to Miho at his old office. Seeing him get emotional, she insists on being happy for the time they have left with each other. Faced with losing his wife for real this time, Chang-ho promises to do everything he can to help her. Elsewhere, Gigwang deals with Miho's news by himself. Amidst demands of his withdrawal from the election, Mayor Doha is summoned for an investigation with Dr. Juhi at the prosecution office the next day. Knowing that Chang-ho and Ji-hoon will be observing his interrogation, Mayor Doha challenges them to prove NK Chemicals' illegal dumping while insisting that he will quite easily be re-elected as the city's mayor. Realizing that they intend to blame everything on Chairman Kong, Chang-ho asks Ji-hoon to let Dr. Ju-hee go after a brief questioning. Meeting her while she leaves, he tells her that Ji-hoon will soon be exhuming the chairman's body for an autopsy. Knowing that the mayor's assistant will be able to contact him on her behalf, Dr. Ju-hee lets him know about the chairman's autopsy. After a rigorous 72 hours of questioning, the prosecution is still unable to arrest Mayor Doha, who later announces an investigation into NK Chemical. As predicted by the mayor, he does indeed win the election 2 days later, with Dr. Ju-hee participating in the celebration only as a formality. Later, a parcel is delivered to Miho at Chang-ho's office with a note from Dr. Ju-hee. Since she sent them her husband's burner phone, Chang-ho confirms her willingness to testify at the trial as well. 2 days later at the trial, Dr. Ju-hee's marked absence troubles the group even as the chairman's secretary states ownership of the burner phone. He calls the last dialed number, which turns out to be Mayor Doha's. Stating that Mayor Doha wouldn't have called himself, the secretary proves that the burner phone cannot belong to the mayor. It is then revealed that Mayor Doha knew of his wife's deception through a hidden camera and had asked for the secretary's help. Further, as punishment, Dr. Ju-hee is in the mental hospital being silenced by the head nurse. Eventually, the mayor is pronounced not guilty due to lack of evidence. After the trial, Miho suddenly collapses and is rushed to the hospital. Gaining consciousness later, she seems to realize that her end is near and expresses her love one last time. Her wish is fulfilled when she passes away peacefully in her sleep holding Chang-ho's hand. Finding Mayor Doha at his swim session later, Chang-ho announces having acquired the entire building. He then accuses the mayor of turning into a power-hungry and evil coward. Realizing that he has no regrets for the endless pain and loss of lives caused by his deeds, Chang-ho mentions being relieved about not committing a sin. Questioning the hint, Mayor Doha coughs up blood, which leads to Chang-ho revealing that the water in the pool had already been replaced with NK Chemicals wastewater. Paying the price of his sins and meeting his end in the same way as countless others, Mayor Doha falls back into the water as Chang-ho makes his way out of the building. Over the next few days, victims of NF9 file a suit of $1 trillion against NK Chemical, with Chang-ho as their legal representative armed with Dr. Seo's paper. Saved by Ji-hoon and Ashley, Dr. Ju-hee testifies in court about the correlation of cancer patients and NF9 leading to the VIPs receiving a sentence of 10 years with Warden Park and the other inmates they had previously bullied. Ji-hoon is eventually made the president of his group of companies, and Mayor Doha's stash of money finds a home at several orphanages and nursing homes across the city in the form of anonymous donations, leading to Chang-ho becoming the kind and righteous big mouse Miho had wanted him to be. Thanks for sticking until the very end. If you enjoyed this recap, I'd appreciate a like and a comment. And as always, catch you on the next one.